The rift between worlds. There are few events in the grim annals of the 41st millennium more catastrophic than the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler. Across the length of the Cadian Gate, reality itself groaned under the weight of unleashed chaos. Warp storms devoured entire star systems, their malevolent energies tearing through the fabric of space and time with an appetite that knew no bounds. The imperium of man, that vast bulwark against the darkness, trembled as its most sacred defenses crumbled before the relentless advance of the arch-enemy. But imagine for a moment if the storms that consumed Cadia reached further than any mortal mind could fathom. Imagine if those ravenous currents of pure chaos struck not merely at the material realm, but at the very boundaries between realities themselves. Above the fortress world of Cassiopathia, the sky blazed with unnatural fire. Warp lightning carved jagged scars across the heavens, each bolt carrying with it the screams of demons and the laughter of thirsting gods. The planet below endured its 14th day of siege, its once proud bastions reduced to smoking rubble by the endless tide of traitor guard and cultist rabble. In the trenches carved from the world's bleeding soil, loyal imperial guardsmen held their ground with the grim determination that had carried humanity through 10,000 years of war. Colonel Kastner of the Mordian Iron Guard pressed his back against the ferrocrete wall of his command bunker, feeling the vibrations of another demon engine's footfall shaking dust from the reinforced ceiling. His vox operators whispered reports in clipped Gothic, their voices steady despite the madness raging beyond their walls. 3 regiments remained combat effective. Ammunition reserves would last perhaps 6 more hours. No relief force would arrive. The colonel had made peace with these facts, as had every man under his command. The warp storm above seemed to pulse with malicious intent, its roiling energies casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. Then something changed. The storm's howling grew deeper, more resonant, as if the very universe held its breath. A new current rippled through the chaotic maelstrom, one that carried with it the scent of different stars and the echo of foreign wars. Reality tore. The rift that opened above Cassiopathia defied every law of physics the tech priests claimed to understand. Unlike the ragged wounds that marked typical warp incursions, this breach formed with surgical precision, its edges crackling with energies that belonged to no dimension known to imperial science. Through that impossible portal tumbled debris from another galaxy entirely, twisted metal that bore no resemblance to any known STC pattern, and at its center, a vessel unlike anything recorded in the archives of Mars. The Forward Unto Dawn plummeted through atmosphere already choked with smoke and ash, its hull scarred by conflicts fought in distant stars. Emergency thrusters fired sporadically, their computerized systems struggling to compensate for gravitational forces that followed alien mathematics. The ship struck the contested ground between Imperial and traitor lines with the force of a falling cathedral, carving a molten furrow through abandoned hab blocks and shattered fortifications. From his bunker, Colonel Kastner watched the impact through magnification lenses, his weathered face grim with the knowledge that whatever had fallen from the storm would complicate an already desperate situation. The crash site lay within the contested zone, too close to enemy positions for a standard recovery operation. Yet something about the vessel's configuration troubled him. Its design followed principles that seemed almost familiar, as if humanity itself had built it, though no forge world in the Imperium possessed such capabilities. The silence that followed the impact stretched for long minutes, broken only by the distant chatter of autogun fire and the occasional roar of a Chaos Predator's engines. Then movement stirred within the wreckage. A section of the hull, clearly meant to serve as an emergency hatch, cycled open with the soft hiss of equalizing pressure. The figure that emerged defied easy categorization. Clad in armor of deep green and gold, he stood taller than any baseline human, yet shorter than the Adeptus Astartes. His movements carried the fluid grace of a predator, each step calculated and precise, despite the treacherous footing of twisted metal and shattered stone. The helmet that concealed his features gleamed with the subtle light of advanced technology, its design suggesting both protection and enhanced awareness. Master Chief Petty Officer John 117 stepped into Hell and found it familiar. The battlefield that stretched before him bore uncomfortable similarities to the glassed plains of Reach, though the architecture spoke of a different aesthetic entirely. Gothic spires thrust skyward like accusing fingers, their surfaces carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in his peripheral vision. The air tasted of blood and burning promethium, while the screams that echoed across the contested ground carried notes of madness that chilled even a Spartan's hardened soul. His motion tracker painted the tactical situation in clean geometric patterns. Friendly forces, he designated them as such based on their defensive postures and apparent organization, held a rough perimeter approximately 800 meters to the northeast. Hostiles approached from multiple vectors, their movements erratic but purposeful. The electromagnetic spectrum buzzed with vox chatter in a language his translation protocols couldn't pass, though the urgency in the voices needed no interpretation. A lasgun beam seared past his helmet, close enough to register on his armor's threat detection systems. 3 figures in tattered uniforms emerged from the rubble of a collapsed wall, their weapons trained on his position. The lead soldier wore the insignia of command, though his equipment appeared archaic by UNSC standards. Behind him, 2 troopers maintained overwatch positions, their fingers steady on triggers despite the obvious uncertainty in their eyes. "Hold there, heretic!" the sergeant called in accented low Gothic, the words carrying through Chief's audio pickups despite their foreign cadence. "Stand down and submit to the Emperor's mercy, or face his wrath." Chief raised his hands slowly, the gesture carefully calculated to appear non-threatening, while keeping his options open. The MA-5D assault rifle, mag-locked to his back, remained within easy reach, though he hoped to avoid violence against what appeared to be Allied forces. His shield generators hummed at minimal power, ready to respond to hostile action, but not yet engaged. The sergeant advanced, his lasgun never wavering from Chief's center mass. At this range, the weapon might actually penetrate his shields, though the Mjolnir's energy distribution systems would likely prevent significant damage. What concerned him more was the mixture of awe and terror in the man's eyes, as if Chief represented something both wondrous and terrible. "What manner of creation are you?" the sergeant whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden lull between artillery barrages. "Your armor bears no chapter markings, yet you stand taller than any baseline human. Are you some new creation of the Omnissiah, blessed for this darkest hour?" Before Chief could formulate a response, new contacts appeared on his motion tracker. A dozen figures approached from the south, their movement patterns unlike anything in his tactical database. They seemed to flow across the broken ground like liquid shadow, their forms shifting between human and something altogether more disturbing. The lead figure wore robes that had once been white, but now bore stains that suggested unspeakable rituals. "Blessed is the day," the cultist intoned, his voice carrying undertones that made Chief's shields flicker with sympathetic resonance. "The gods have delivered unto us a worthy sacrifice, one whose life force will fuel the final summoning. Rejoice, faithful, for our ascension draws near." The guardsmen spun toward this new threat, their lasguns tracking targets that seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. The sergeant's face paled as he recognized the symbols carved into the cultist's flesh. marks that seemed to burn with their own malevolent light. "Chaos spawn," he spat, his weapon already firing controlled bursts toward the approaching figures. "Form up, lads. We die here, but we take these heretics with us." Chief's tactical assessment concluded in microseconds. The Imperial forces represented potential allies, while the cultists displayed clear hostile intent backed by what appeared to be warp-based augmentation. His decision matrix aligned with protocols established across a dozen different campaigns. Defend civilians, eliminate hostile forces, establish rapport with friendly factions. The MA-5D came off his back in a fluid motion that spoke of decades of combat experience. The weapon's targeting system interfaced seamlessly with his helmet's HUD, painting priority targets among the advancing cultists. He squeezed the trigger in controlled bursts, each round guided by technology that would not be invented in this galaxy for 10,000 years. The effect was immediate and devastating. Where lasergun fire had merely singed the cultists' unnatural flesh, Chief's 7.62mm rounds tore through them with brutal efficiency. The lead cultist staggered as 3 rounds center-punched his torso, his death scream cutting off in a wet gurgle. Another cultist raised a weapon that resembled no design in any Imperial manual, only to have his arm severed by a precisely placed shot that Chief calculated to disable rather than kill. The guardsmen stared in shocked silence as this unknown warrior eliminated threats that had claimed the lives of entire squads throughout the siege. The sergeant's weathered face showed a mixture of gratitude and growing unease, as if he witnessed either a miracle or the gravest heresy. The last cultist fell with Chief's rifle trained on his heart, the Spartan's stance never shifting from the textbook firing position drilled into him during countless training exercises. The sudden silence felt heavier than the preceding violence, weighted with questions that neither side possessed the language to ask. "Who are you?" the sergeant finally managed, his lasgun lowered but not quite at rest. Behind him, his men exchanged glances that spoke of legends and nightmares in equal measure. Chief lowered his rifle but did not secure it, his sensors detecting additional movement in the surrounding ruins. When he spoke, his voice carried through his helmet's external speakers with mechanical precision that somehow retained human warmth. "Master Chief Petty Officer John 117, United Nations Space Command. I'm here to help." The words meant nothing to the guardsmen, referencing organizations and authorities that had never existed in their reality. Yet something in the warrior's bearing, in the calm certainty of his stance, spoke to depths of character that transcended language barriers. The sergeant found himself believing, despite every regulation that warned against trusting the unknown. Colonel Kastner's voice crackled through the Vox unit, clipped to the sergeant's belt, the transmission heavy with static from the ongoing warp storm. "Sergeant Vex, report. We detected weapons fire at your position." "Unknown contact engaged cultist forces, sir," Vex replied, his eyes never leaving Chief's armored form. "Hostile threats eliminated. Requesting orders for disposition of allied combatant." The pause that followed stretched long enough for another wave of distant artillery to roll across the battlefield. When Kastner's voice returned, it carried the weight of a decision that would echo through the coming chapters of war. "Bring him in, Sergeant. If the Emperor has seen fit to deliver aid in our darkest hour, we shall not question his methods. But watch him carefully. In these times, even miracles can hide heresy." As the small group made their way through the rubble-strewn streets toward Imperial lines, none of them could have imagined that they carried with them a catalyst that would reshape the very foundations of their war-torn galaxy. The Master Chief walked among them, his presence both blessing and burden, herald of changes yet to come. The warp storm above continued its eternal howling, but for the first time since the siege began, its voice seemed somehow diminished. Whether this represented the first flickering of hope or the prelude to an even greater darkness, only time would reveal. In the grim darkness of the far future, such distinctions often proved to be matters of perspective rather than fact, and in the shadows of ruined hab blocks, things that served older gods than those worshipped in the distant halls of terror watched with growing interest as new pieces arranged themselves upon the board of war. Heretic or hero? The interrogation chamber beneath Casarpathia's primary command bunker had witnessed confessions extracted through methods both subtle and brutal. Its ferrocrete walls bore scorch marks from las pistol executions, while chains hung from mounting points designed to hold heretics and traitors until truth could be separated from treachery. Yet Commissar Grendel had never faced a subject quite like the armored giant who sat motionless in the chamber's center. For 3 hours, the Master Chief had endured questions delivered in Gothic, Low Gothic, and even fragments of archaic Terran dialects that Grendel had learned during his years serving the Schola Progenium. The warrior's responses came through external speakers, his voice carrying an unsettling combination of military precision and what could only be described as synthetic enhancement. Each answer raised more questions than it resolved. United Nations Space Command, Grendel repeated, tasting the foreign words as if they might reveal hidden poison. An organization that claims dominion over space itself, yet bears no resemblance to any imperial structure recorded in the archives. Explain again how you came to possess technology that surpasses even the sacred designs of Mars. Chief's helmet turned slightly toward the commissar, the gesture somehow conveying patience despite the blank faceplate that revealed no expression. My armor was constructed using technology developed during humanity's expansion into the galaxy. The Mjolnir Mark VI represents centuries of accumulated knowledge applied to the protection of specialized soldiers. The answer triggered another wave of discomfort in Grendel's mind. This stranger spoke of humanity's expansion as if it had occurred along different paths entirely, following principles that bore no resemblance to the Great Crusade or the sacred quest for standard template constructs. Either he represented the most elaborate deception in recorded history, or something far more disturbing had manifested on Casarpathia. Through the reinforced viewing port, tech priest Dominus Karkinos observed the interrogation, while his mind processed data streams that defied every principle of sacred machine knowledge. The stranger's armor registered on Auspex scans as a single, unified system, rather than the discrete components that characterized even the most advanced imperial designs. Power flowed through conduits that followed no pattern documented in the archives of Mars, while the helmet's sensor array displayed capabilities that suggested technology beyond current imperial understanding. "Blessed Omnissiah," Karkinos whispered through his vox grill, binary cant flowing beneath his words in streams of frustrated calculation. "The machine spirit that inhabits his armor responds to queries I didn't know could be asked. It speaks in languages that predate the quest for knowledge, yet employs principles that suggest advancement beyond our current capabilities." Techmagos Vex, whose duties normally involved maintaining the regiment's armored vehicles, found himself drawn to the technical readouts, despite regulations that restricted such analysis to higher-ranked adepts. The power source alone defied explanation. A fusion reactor, compact enough to fit within the warrior's backpack, yet capable of sustaining energy outputs that would challenge a Lehman Russ battle tank's main power plant. "Perhaps," Vex ventured through private Vox channel, "we witness not heresy, but revelation. The Omnissiah works through many instruments to advance human understanding. Could this warrior represent divine guidance, delivered precisely when we most require it? Karkanos's response carried undertones of binary irritation, mixed with reluctant curiosity. Your speculation borders on dangerous territory, Magos. Yet I cannot deny that his technological integration surpasses anything we have achieved outside the blessed ranks of the Adeptus Astartes. Observe his neural interface patterns. They suggest enhancement beyond mere augmentation. The moment that transformed speculation into crisis occurred without warning. Chief's helmet display activated an external projection system, casting holographic readouts into the air above his position. The sudden manifestation of what appeared to be artificial intelligence sent shock waves through every Imperial observer. A fragmentary figure materialized in flickering blue light, humanoid in outline but clearly synthetic in nature. Her voice, when it spoke, carried feminine intonations that somehow conveyed personality despite obvious artificial origins. "Chief, I'm detecting massive amounts of encrypted data traffic in the local electromagnetic spectrum, military frequencies, battlefield coordination protocols, and what appears to be religious broadcasting on multiple channels. Where exactly are we?" The interrogation chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of ventilation systems and the distant rumble of artillery. Commissar Grendel's hand moved instinctively toward his bolt pistol, while every tech priest present began reciting protective cant against the machine heresy they believed they were witnessing. "Cortana," Chief said simply, his voice carrying none of the alarm that gripped his captors. "We've been displaced from our operational area. New galaxy, different human civilization. Initiating contact protocols with local military authority." The artificial intelligence, for that was clearly what they witnessed, despite every Imperial teaching that declared such things abomination, turned her attention toward the viewing port. Her gaze seemed to focus directly on Commissar Grendel, as if she could perceive him through reinforced armor glass that should have blocked any conventional sensor. "Fascinating architectural design," Cortana observed, her tone carrying intellectual curiosity rather than the cold malice that Imperial doctrine associated with thinking machines. Gothic revival with clear defensive prioritization. These people have been fighting for a very long time. Tech Priest Karkanos felt his augmented heart skip a beat as the entity's attention shifted to encompass his position. When she spoke again, her words carried implications that struck at the very foundations of Mechanicus theology. "Your cybernetic integration is remarkably advanced for this technology base. Neural interface architecture suggests direct communion between biological and artificial components. How do you maintain signal coherence without quantum entanglement stabilizers?" The question revealed knowledge that no abominable intelligence should possess. More disturbing still, it demonstrated curiosity about Imperial augmentation rather than immediate hostility. Karkanos found himself forming responses before his logical processes could intervene to prevent such interaction. Before any Imperial could frame an appropriate response to this unprecedented situation, proximity alarms began wailing throughout the command complex. Sergeant Vex's voice crackled through the Vox network, his words clipped with the urgency of imminent combat. "Contact front! Chaos Raiders! Mechanized column approaching from the northwest. Count 12, Rhino APCs, supported by 2 Predator tanks. Estimate company strength assault incoming." Colonel Kastner's voice cut through the tactical chatter with practiced authority. "All units to defensive positions. Prepare for breakthrough assault on Sector 7. Heavy weapons teams priority targets on the armor." Chief rose from his position without seeking permission. The motion fluid, despite the restraints that should have held him in place. The manacles that had secured his armor simply parted, their mechanisms apparently responding to some form of remote override that bypassed their locking systems entirely. "Cortana," "Tactical assessment," he said, his voice carrying the tone of a commander rather than a prisoner. The AI's holographic form shifted, data streams flowing across her translucent features as she processed information gathered through sensors that the Imperials couldn't detect. 12 armored personnel carriers, probable troop capacity 8 to 10 each. 2 main battle tanks. Approximate classification predates our database, but shows similarities to pre-war Earth designs. Recommend immediate deployment to prevent breakthrough. Commissar Grendel found himself faced with a decision that would define his career and possibly his soul. Imperial doctrine demanded the immediate execution of anyone who consorted with abominable intelligence, yet the tactical situation left little room for doctrinal purity. The approaching Chaos forces represented a threat that could shatter their defensive line entirely. "You will submit to Imperial authority," Grendel declared, his bolt pistol trained on Chief Center Mass, despite recognizing the futility of the gesture. "Your companion will be silenced immediately, and you will comply with all orders issued by legitimate Imperial command." Chief's helmet turned toward the Commissar, and for a moment something almost resembling sympathy colored his mechanical voice. "Commissar, with respect, we can discuss classification protocols after we've dealt with the immediate threat. Right now, your people need every advantage they can get." The sound of approaching tracked vehicles grew louder, accompanied by the distinctive whine of chaos-corrupted engines that seemed to scream with demonic possession. Through the command bunker's reinforced walls came the battle cries of traitor guardsmen and the inhuman roars of creatures that had once been human. Tech Magos Vex made a decision that would echo through his remaining years of service to the Omnissiah. "Commissar," he said, his Vox grill crackling with static that couldn't quite mask his conviction. "Perhaps the Omnissiah has sent us precisely the instrument we require. Divine providence often arrives in forms that challenge our understanding." Colonel Kastner's voice carried through the bunker's communication system, underlaid with the sound of defensive weapons engaging their targets. "Heavy bolter teams report enemy advance elements in range, requesting permission to engage." Chief moved toward the chamber's exit with purposeful stride, his presence somehow commanding despite his theoretical status as prisoner. "Colonel Kastner, this is John 117, requesting permission to support defensive operations. I can provide tactical advantages that your current force structure lacks." The pause that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though tactical chronometers registered only seconds. When Kastner's response came, it carried the weight of desperate pragmatism overriding doctrinal caution. "Permission granted, John 117. Sergeant Vex will coordinate your deployment. Emperor help us all." As Chief strode through corridors filled with Imperial guardsmen preparing for what might be their final battle, none could ignore the way his presence seemed to alter the very atmosphere around them. Some whispered prayers to the God Emperor, begging for protection against potential heresy. Others found themselves hoping that this strange warrior truly represented divine intervention in their darkest hour. The artificial intelligence that accompanied him remained silent during their movement to the front lines, though her occasional glances toward Imperial personnel suggested an awareness that bordered on genuine concern. Whether this represented sophisticated programming or something approaching actual consciousness remained a question that would trouble tech priest minds for years to come. At the primary defense line, Chief surveyed the approaching enemy force through his helmet's enhanced optics. Chaos-corrupted vehicles bore symbols that seemed to writhe with malevolent life, their armor plating marked with devotional scars and demon-touched modifications that defied rational engineering. The troops they carried would fight with fanatical fury, backed by the dark gifts of their chosen gods. "Cortana, "Threat assessment and recommended engagement protocols," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the Imperial defenders who crouched in positions around him. "Multiple armor targets approaching optimal engagement range. Recommend concentrated fire on lead vehicles to create obstacle for following units. Infantry deployment shows standard assault doctrine with probable cultist support." "Chief, these people have been fighting this war for a very long time." Sergeant Vex, positioned at Chief's left shoulder with his lasgun ready, found himself asking a question that violated every regulation regarding interaction with potential heretics. "What do you see that we do not, warrior?" Chief's response would remain etched in the sergeant's memory for the remainder of his service to the Emperor. "I see soldiers who've been holding impossible odds through pure determination. Today, you get some help." The Chaos Assault struck with the fury of damnation unleashed. Yet for the first time since the siege began, the defenders of Casarpathia discovered what it meant to fight alongside a legend. The Inquisition's gaze. The astropathic message that summoned Inquisitor Malthus to Casarpathia burned through the warp with urgency that penetrated even the chaotic storm surrounding the siege world. 3 words repeated through the psychic transmission like a litany of damnation. Technological heresy confirmed. Such reports reached the Ordo Hereticus daily, most proving to be false alarms triggered by desperate commanders grasping for explanations when conventional tactics failed. Yet something about this particular communication carried weight that demanded immediate investigation. Malthus descended from his transport with the measured stride of one who had walked through 1,000 hells and found them wanting. His power armor bore no heraldic markings, save the simple inquisitorial rosette upon his chest, its austere design speaking to decades of service in humanity's darkest corners. Behind him came a retinue trained to recognize threats that lesser minds could not perceive, threats that wore familiar faces while harboring alien purpose. Colonel Kastner met the Inquisitor at the landing pad, his weathered face betraying none of the apprehension that gripped his chest. In the 3 days since the unknown warrior's arrival, defensive operations had achieved efficiency levels that bordered on the miraculous. Chaos assaults that should have breached their lines had been repelled with minimal casualties, while enemy armor had fallen to coordinated strikes that displayed tactical brilliance beyond conventional imperial doctrine. "Report!" Malthus commanded, his voice carrying authority that brooked no evasion or embellishment. "Unknown combatant of possible Xenos origin," Kastner began, his words carefully chosen to convey facts without interpretation. "Technological capabilities exceed known imperial standards. Combat effectiveness against chaos, forces proven beyond question. Theological implications, uncertain." Malthus absorbed this assessment, while his practiced gaze swept across the defensive positions that ringed the landing zone. Even without technical expertise, he could recognize modifications to standard imperial fortifications. Firing positions had been adjusted to optimize interlocking fields of fire, while weapon emplacements showed repositioning that spoke to understanding of ballistic principles beyond standard guard training. "Where is this warrior now?" the Inquisitor asked, though his enhanced senses had already detected the presence that radiated controlled lethality from the bunker complex ahead. "Interrogation Chamber 7, my lord. Under guard, as you commanded, though." Kastner's words trailed off as he struggled to frame his concerns appropriately. "Speak plainly, Colonel. What troubles you about this situation?" Kastner's response came with the blunt honesty of a soldier who had survived 4 decades of warfare through unflinching assessment of tactical realities. "He saved 3 companies, sir. When the chaos breakthrough came, his intervention prevented total collapse of Sector 7. Whatever he represents, he bleeds for the Imperium." The interrogation chamber that awaited Malthus had been prepared according to protocols designed to break the will of heretics and traitors. Psychic dampening fields hummed with barely contained energy, while autoscribes recorded every word for later analysis by teams trained to detect the subtle lies that marked corruption's presence. Yet the figure who waited within seemed unaffected by measures that had reduced hardened criminals to babbling confessors. Master Chief sat motionless in the chamber's center, his armor registering on Malthus's auspex as a technological marvel that defied easy categorization. Power flowed through systems that followed no pattern documented in Imperial archives, while the helmet that concealed his features suggested capabilities that approached the sacred mysteries of the Adeptus Astartes. "I am Inquisitor Malthus of the Order Hereticus," he announced, his words carrying psychic weight that most subjects found overwhelming. "You will submit to examination and answer truthfully all questions posed to you. Deception will be detected and punished accordingly." Chief's helmet turned toward the Inquisitor with mechanical precision that somehow conveyed respectful attention. "I understand, Inquisitor. I'm prepared to answer your questions to the best of my ability." The response carried none of the fear or defiance that typically marked such encounters. More disturbing still, Malthus detected no trace of the psychic resonance that characterized human consciousness when subjected to his enhanced scrutiny. Either this being possessed mental defenses beyond anything in his experience, or its nature fell outside conventional understanding entirely. "State your origin and purpose," Malthus commanded, allowing his psychic presence to press against Chief's mind with force sufficient to extract truth from the most determined resistance. What he found there defied every principle of xenobiology and psychic investigation that had guided his career. Memories flowed in patterns that spoke of genuine human experience, yet their content referenced a reality that bore no resemblance to Imperial history. Worlds that had never felt the Emperor's light hosted civilizations that had achieved technological advancement through purely secular means. Wars against alien species proceeded without reference to chaos or the sacred duties that defined humanity's struggle for survival. "United Nations Space Command," Chief replied, his voice steady despite the psychic assault that should have left him prostrate with pain. "Spartan 2 Program, Service Number 117. My mission was to protect humanity from threats beyond our current understanding." Malthus recoiled as Chief's memories revealed themselves with crystal clarity. Here was a warrior who had indeed dedicated his existence to humanity's defense, yet the humanity he served followed paths that Imperial doctrine declared impossible. Technology advanced without the guiding wisdom of Mars, while artificial intelligence served as ally rather than abomination. "Impossible," Malthus whispered, his certainty shaken by evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about human development. No branch of humanity could achieve such advancement without the Emperor's guidance. You represent either the most elaborate deception ever conceived, or... The implication hung unfinished in the chamber's sterile air. If this warrior's memories proved genuine, they suggested that humanity's destiny might follow multiple paths simultaneously across the infinite expanse of existence itself. The moment that crystallized Malthus's growing dilemma came when Chief witnessed standard Imperial justice protocols in action. A dozen captured cultists had been scheduled for public execution, their deaths intended to reinforce loyalty among civilian populations whose faith wavered under siege conditions. Standard procedure called for servitor conversion of useful specimens, while the remainder would face purification through flame. Chief's intervention came without warning or authorization. As the execution detail prepared to carry out their sacred duty, he stepped forward with calm authority that somehow commanded attention, despite his theoretical status as prisoner under investigation. "Inquisitor," he said, his voice carrying none of the deference that imperial protocol demanded. "These prisoners possess intelligence value that execution would eliminate. Interrogation could reveal chaos, operational patterns, and strategic objectives." Malthus found himself torn between doctrinal certainty and tactical pragmatism. Imperial law demanded the immediate purification of those who had trafficked with demons, yet the warrior's suggestion carried merit that professional duty could not ignore. More disturbing still was Chief's reaction when informed of standard servitor conversion protocols. "You're talking about lobotomizing human beings and turning them into biological machinery," Chief stated, his tone carrying moral judgment that bordered on condemnation. "Where I come from, that would constitute a war crime." The words struck like physical blows against every principle that guided imperial governance. Yet Malthus found himself unable to simply dismiss them as heretical madness. This warrior's moral framework, however alien to imperial understanding, appeared to spring from genuine concern for human dignity rather than the corruption that typically motivated such challenges to established authority. The demonstration that followed would remain burned into the memories of every witness present. Chief requested permission to interrogate one cultist personally, employing methods that eschewed physical torture in favor of psychological techniques that Malthus recognized as remarkably sophisticated. Within minutes, information flowed that revealed Chaos operational security far more effectively than standard extraction protocols. "The ritual site operates from beneath the cathedral district," the cultist confessed, his voice hollow with despair that owed nothing to physical pain. 7 secondary locations provide backup channels for the summoning. The Magister seeks to open permanent portals during the next warp storm cycle. Intelligence that would have required days to extract through conventional means had been acquired through methods that left the subject intact and capable of providing additional information. More significantly, Chief had achieved these results while maintaining protocols that treated even corrupted humans as beings worthy of basic consideration. When Chaplain Mordus attempted to convert Chief to acceptance of the imperial creed, the theological crisis that followed threatened to shake the foundations of faith among local military personnel. Chief listened respectfully to explanations of the God Emperor's sacrifice and humanity's sacred duty to cleanse the galaxy of alien influence. His response carried weight that transcended simple disagreement. "I've served alongside artificial intelligences, fought beside alien allies, and seen humanity achieve greatness through cooperation rather than conquest," he stated with quiet conviction. "Your Emperor may have chosen sacrifice to preserve your species, but where I come from, we found other paths to survival." The words constituted heresy of the highest order, yet they carried none of the malice or corruption that typically marked such statements. Chaplain Mordus found himself struggling to frame appropriate response to challenges that seemed to spring from genuine alternative experience rather than demonic influence. Tech priest Karkanos, who had monitored the proceedings with growing fascination, finally voiced the question that haunted every imperial observer. "If your claims prove accurate, what does this suggest about the nature of human destiny itself? Could the Omnissiah's plans encompass possibilities beyond our current understanding?" Malthus realized that traditional categories of classification had proven inadequate to address the reality that Chief represented. This being demonstrated loyalty to human welfare that transcended any possibility of Xenos infiltration, yet his origins clearly lay beyond imperial experience. Standard protocols demanded either execution or indoctrination, yet both options would eliminate potential advantages that current circumstances could not afford to waste. The decision that followed would echo through Inquisition records for centuries to come. Malthus composed the official designation that would define chief status within imperial hierarchy, his words chosen with precision that acknowledged unprecedented circumstances while maintaining doctrinal flexibility for future interpretation. By authority of the Inquisition, and in recognition of demonstrated loyalty to human welfare, I hereby classify the individual known as Master Chief as a sanctioned Xenos ally, grade Sigma, Malthus declared, his voice carrying across the command bunker through vox amplification that ensured every defender heard his words. He shall serve under imperial authority while retaining autonomous operational status. Any who question this designation answer directly to the Ordo Hereticus. The classification represented a compromise that satisfied no one completely while addressing immediate tactical necessities. Chief would serve alongside imperial forces without fully joining their ranks, his alien origin acknowledged while his utility remained accessible. Whether this arrangement would prove sustainable remained a question that only future conflicts could resolve. As Malthus completed his investigation and prepared to depart for other theaters of war, he carried with him questions that would trouble his sleep for years to come. If humanity's destiny could indeed follow multiple paths across the infinite cosmos, what did this suggest about the Emperor's plan and the Imperium's role in the greater scope of existence? The warp storms that raged above Cassiopathia seemed to pulse with malevolent awareness, as if the dark gods themselves took note of changes that might alter the fundamental balance of the eternal war. In the deepest reaches of the Imperium, powers beyond mortal understanding stirred with interest in this new piece upon the board of destiny. Chief stood at the bunker's observation deck, his enhanced sensors tracking movement in the contested zones beyond Imperial lines. The classification that Malthus had imposed would provide operational flexibility while maintaining the suspicion that seemed endemic to this galaxy's human civilization. Whether he could forge meaningful alliance with forces that viewed pragmatic cooperation as potential heresy remained an open question. Yet for the first time since his arrival in this grim reality, Chief found himself cautiously optimistic about the possibilities that lay ahead. The humans of this galaxy had endured 10,000 years of warfare that would have destroyed lesser species. If they could learn to accept help from unlikely sources, they might yet achieve victories that pure doctrine could never deliver. In the shadows of ruined hab blocks, things that served the ruinous powers watched with growing concern as new variables entered calculations that had remained stable for millennia. The eternal war was acquiring dimensions that even the architects of fate hadn't anticipated. Lessons in darkness. The executions began at dawn, as they had every morning since Chief's arrival on Cassiopathia. From his position atop the command bunker's observation tower, he watched through his helmet's enhanced optics as Imperial guardsmen herded condemned prisoners into the plaza that had once served as the world's primary commercial center. The condemned walked in chains forged from blessed adamantium, their crimes ranging from theft of military rations to the more serious offense of expressing doubt about the Imperium's ultimate victory. Commissioner Yarick, a thin man whose augmetic eye gleamed with cold efficiency, read the charges in high Gothic, while servo skulls recorded each word for posterity. The first prisoner, a factory worker accused of hoarding grain while his neighbors starved, knelt before the execution block with resignation that spoke of long acceptance. His death came swiftly, delivered by a chain sword that hummed with mechanical precision. Chief observed the proceedings with growing unease that challenged every principle that had guided his service to humanity. In his experience, military justice focused on maintaining order within combat units, while preserving the lives of those they were sworn to protect. The systematic elimination of civilians for infractions that would merit counseling or administrative punishment in UNSC space struck him as wasteful at best and barbaric at worst. "Standard procedure, nothing more," Colonel Kastner explained when Chief inquired about the morning's activities. "Food hoarding during siege conditions undermines morale among defenders. Better to execute one and ensure the rest remember their duty to the Emperor." The logic possessed internal consistency that Chief could recognize intellectually, yet it violated moral frameworks that had been integral to Spartan conditioning from the earliest days of his training. Dr. Halsey had emphasized that Spartans existed to protect human life, not to eliminate it for the convenience of military administration. The sight that truly shook his convictions came later that morning, when he witnessed a procession of children no older than 12 being inducted into the Planetary Defense Force's Youth Auxiliary. These recruits carried lasguns only marginally smaller than those wielded by adult soldiers, while their faces bore expressions of fierce determination mixed with barely concealed terror. "They volunteer," Chaplain Mordus informed him, apparently sensing Chief's discomfort. "Their parents died defending Section 12 yesterday. Without family connections to secure civilian work assignments, they choose service over slow starvation. The Emperor provides for those who serve." Chief watched these child soldiers practice firing drills under the supervision of grizzled sergeants who corrected their stances with casual brutality that would have resulted in court-martial proceedings in any UNSC facility. Yet he could not deny the tactical necessity that drove such practices. With adult casualties mounting daily and relief forces still weeks away at best, every able body represented potential salvation for the remaining defenders. The moral complexity deepened when he observed servitor conversion protocols in the facility's medici section. Former criminals and those declared mentally unfit for continued existence underwent surgical procedures that transformed them into biological machinery, capable of performing tasks too dangerous or repetitive for valuable human personnel. The lobotomized results carried out their assigned functions with mechanical precision, their personalities surgically removed to leave only useful capacity. Tech Priest Vex, who had been studying Chief's armor systems with increasing fascination, attempted to explain the theological framework that justified such practices. "The flesh is weak, honored ally, but the spirit can be purified through sacred modification. These beings serve the Omnisire more perfectly in their altered state than they ever could as flawed humans." Chief found himself struggling to frame appropriate responses to explanations that challenged his fundamental understanding of human dignity. The UNSC had developed advanced prosthetics and cognitive enhancement technologies, but always with the consent and benefit of the recipients. The systematic elimination of personality and free will represented violation of principles that had guided human civilization since its earliest days. Yet as the siege continued into its third week, Chief began to understand the brutal mathematics that governed imperial decision-making. Resources existed in finite quantities, while threats multiplied with each passing day. Every calorie consumed by a prisoner represented nutrition denied to defenders. Every hospital bed occupied by the mentally ill meant one less space for wounded soldiers who could return to combat. The crisis that crystallized his evolving perspective arrived in the form of Vox transmissions intercepted by Imperial communication specialists. Chaos cult cells operating within the civilian population had begun coordinating their activities, using commercial broadcasting equipment to spread coded messages that referenced an approaching Night of Ascension. Governor Hedrick, whose authority over planetary administration had grown increasingly tenuous as military necessity overrode civilian governance, convened an emergency session to address the internal threat. Chief attended as an observer, his status as sanctioned Xenos ally, granting him access to strategic planning sessions while limiting his formal authority. 37 confirmed cult cells identified within the civilian population, Intelligence Officer Marcus reported, his augmetic voice carrying data streams that painted tactical displays across the chamber's holoprojectors. Estimated membership ranges from 300 to 1,500 individuals. They've corrupted elements of the planetary communication network and may possess access to critical infrastructure. The debate that followed revealed philosophical divisions within Imperial Command that Chief had not previously recognized. Colonel Kastner advocated for surgical strikes against identified cult leadership, while Commissioner Yarrick demanded mass purges of entire hub blocks suspected of harboring sympathizers. Governor Hedrick, caught between military necessity and civilian welfare concerns, struggled to find compromise positions that satisfied no one. Chief's intervention came when the discussion turned to protocols for civilian evacuation from areas designated for purification. "If we know the approximate locations of cult operations," he said, his voice cutting through the heated debate, "we can plan targeted operations that minimize collateral damage while eliminating the primary threats." Yarrick's response carried ice that seemed to freeze the chamber's recycled atmosphere. "Collateral damage, ally. These civilians harbored heretics among their number. Their failure to report corruption makes them complicit in treachery against the God Emperor. Better to burn out the infection entirely than risk its spread." The words struck Chief with impact that transcended their immediate tactical implications. This was a civilization that had learned to view mercy as potential weakness, compassion as dangerous luxury that could not be afforded in an universe where eternal war defined existence itself. Yet he could not accept that such attitudes represented the only path to survival. The opportunity to demonstrate alternative approaches came when cult uprising began during the pre-dawn hours of the siege's 22nd day. Coordinated attacks struck at communication relays, ammunition depots, and water purification facilities with precision that revealed extensive inside knowledge of Imperial defensive systems. Within hours, sections of the city that had remained secure throughout the Chaos assault erupted into civil war, as neighbors turned against neighbors in orgies of violence, fueled by demonic influence. Chief found himself leading a mixed force of Imperial Guard regulars and PDF troops through urban terrain that had transformed overnight into a maze of improvised barricades and killing zones. His tactical expertise, honed through decades of asymmetric warfare against Covenant forces, proved invaluable in environments where every window might conceal a sniper and every doorway could hide an explosive trap. "Advance by squads. Maintain visual contact," he commanded, through Vox channels that linked his helmet's communication system to Imperial equipment through adaptations that Tech Priest Vex had implemented. Priority targets are cult leadership and any ritual sites. Secondary objectives include securing civilian evacuation routes. The fighting that followed would be remembered as the cleansing of Hereticus Quarter, though Chief's tactical reports would emphasize aspects that Imperial chronicles chose to minimize. His forces achieved their objectives with casualties significantly lower than comparable operations, while civilian survival rates exceeded expectations despite the ferocity of cult resistance. The discovery that defined the operation's ultimate significance came when Chief's enhanced sensors detected unusual energy emissions from beneath the district's primary cathedral. Structural scans revealed chamber systems that bore no resemblance to standard Imperial architecture, while electromagnetic analysis indicated power sources that pulsed with rhythms that suggested demonic influence. "Greater Summoning Circle," Chaplain Mordus confirmed, when Chief's reconnaissance data was analyzed by specialists trained in detecting warp-based threats. The cultists have spent months, perhaps years, preparing this site for manifestation of something that shouldn't exist in our reality. The assault that followed tested Chief's capabilities against threats that defied every tactical principle he had mastered during his service to humanity. Cultists enhanced by demonic gifts fought with strength and speed that approached Spartan-level performance, while the ritual chamber itself seemed to resist intrusion through methods that his armor's systems could barely comprehend. Chief led the final assault personally, his enhanced reflexes and tactical experience proving decisive against enemies who relied on raw ferocity rather than disciplined coordination. Yet even his intervention could not prevent all casualties among the Imperial forces who followed him into hell itself. The ritual site's destruction required demolition charges that Tech Priest Vex had prepared using principles derived from analyzing Chief's equipment. The explosions that collapsed the chamber sent shock waves through surrounding hab blocks, while the psychic backlash from the interrupted summoning left 7 Imperial guardsmen catatonic and 2 others dead from cranial hemorrhaging. As Chief stood among the rubble of the destroyed cult complex, surrounded by the bodies of enemies and allies alike, he found himself confronting questions that challenged his fundamental understanding of duty and sacrifice. He had saved thousands of lives by preventing the demon's manifestation, yet his victory had come at costs that included both the deliberate deaths of corrupted humans and the accidental casualties of those he was sworn to protect. Tech Priest Vex approached through the settling dust, his mechadendrites carrying analysis devices that had been scanning Chief's armor throughout the operation. "Honored ally," he said, his vox grill crackling with data stream undertones. "Your tactical performance suggests integration protocols that exceed current Imperial capabilities. With your permission, I would like to study your equipment's machine spirit more extensively." The request carried implications that Chief recognized as potentially dangerous. Sharing Mjolnir technology with Imperial forces might provide them with tactical advantages, but it could also lead to applications that violated principles he had sworn to uphold. Yet the events of recent days had shown him that moral absolutes proved difficult to maintain in circumstances where survival itself remained uncertain. "Within limits," he replied, his voice carrying careful qualification. "I can share tactical data and basic operational principles. Anything that might compromise security protocols or endanger civilian populations remains classified." As the first rays of dawn penetrated the smoke that hung above the cleansed district, Chief found himself looking upon the bodies of both enemies and innocents, with understanding that had been absent during his first days on Casapathia. This humanity lived in darkness so complete that light itself became suspect. Yet they endured because they had learned to accept necessary evils that more fortunate civilizations could never imagine. The moral framework that had guided his service to the UNS. He required adjustment to accommodate realities where mercy might doom millions while cruelty could preserve the species itself. Whether such adaptation represented wisdom or corruption remained a question that only future conflicts could resolve. In the aftermath of victory, Chief realized that his greatest challenge would not be learning to fight alongside Imperial forces, but learning to live with the knowledge of what such alliance required. The universe that had claimed him possessed its own logic, harsh and unforgiving, yet undeniably effective at ensuring humanity's survival against odds that would have destroyed lesser species. The God Emperor's imperium endured because it had learned lessons that Chief was only beginning to understand. Whether he could master such knowledge without losing essential elements of his own humanity remained the test that would define his service in this grim reality. The demon prince rises. The ritual that Chief's intervention had disrupted possessed consequences that extended far beyond the material destruction of its physical components. Though the summoning circle lay in ruins, and its cultist operators had been purged with fire and bolt shell, the psychic energies that had been channeled through Casapathia's warp-touched foundation stones continued to resonate with malevolent purpose. What should have been victory became prelude to catastrophe as the barriers between reality and the imperium began to weaken along stress lines that no human agency could repair. The manifestation began 3 hours past midnight on the 24th day of siege, when reality itself screamed. Across the contested world, every psyker capable of perceiving warp fluctuations collapsed simultaneously, their minds overwhelmed by the psychic shockwave that accompanied something vast and terrible, forcing its way into material existence. Astropaths died at their communication stations, their final transmissions consisting of wordless shrieks that carried undertones of madness that would haunt their listeners for decades to come. Chief felt the change as a pressure against his consciousness that his enhanced neural architecture could process, but not fully comprehend. His motion tracker registered spatial distortions that defied conventional physics, while electromagnetic sensors detected energy patterns that bore no resemblance to any known imperial technology. Through his helmet's enhanced optics, he watched the sky above the cathedral district tear open like a wound, revealing vistas of brass towers and burning lakes that belonged to realms where logic held no dominion. From that impossible breach stepped Vorthak the Bloodthirster, demon prince of Khorne and herald of the blood god's endless rage. His form towered above the ruined hab blocks with bulk that dwarfed even the largest imperial war machines, while brass armor, fused with demonic flesh, bore the accumulated scars of 10,000 battles fought across dimensions where victory meant eternal slaughter. Wings of shadow and flame spread wide enough to blot out the burning sky, while eyes that held the light of dying stars fixed upon the defenders below with hunger that transcended mortal understanding. The demon's voice, when it spoke, shattered windows across 3 city blocks and sent shock waves through ferrocrete foundations that had withstood months of conventional bombardment. "Blood for the blood god!" Vorthak roared, his words carrying psychic weight that drove lesser minds to madness. "Skulls for the skull throne! Let the galaxy burn in righteous fury!" Chief's tactical assessment completed in microseconds, though the results provided little comfort. The entity before them represented a threat that exceeded anything in his combat experience, possessing capabilities that rendered conventional weapons ineffective, while commanding power sources that approached the output of small stars. Standard UNSC protocols offered no guidance for engaging supernatural entities capable of manipulating reality through will alone. The response to this unprecedented crisis came from high orbit, where sensors aboard Imperial Navy vessels detected the massive warp signature that accompanied Vorthak's manifestation. Within minutes of the Demon Prince's arrival, strike cruiser Righteous Fury translated from warp space with the precise timing that marked centuries of combat experience against the forces of chaos. Chapter Master Thaddeus of the Iron Hawks, Space Marine. Chapter had answered similar calls to battle across a dozen star systems, yet the tactical reports that reached him during atmospheric entry spoke of complications that challenged even his extensive experience with demonic incursions. References to an unknown allied combatant and non-standard technological integration suggested variables that standard Codex Astartes doctrine had not anticipated. The drop pod assault that followed would be remembered as one of the most precise deployments in Iron Hawk's history. 43 pods struck the contested zone with accuracy that placed each squad within optimal firing range of their designated targets, while assault squads equipped with jump packs provided mobile support that adapted to battlefield conditions with fluidity that spoke of decades of coordinated training. Chief observed the Space Marine deployment from his position atop the command bunker, his enhanced optics tracking individual astartes as they emerged from their drop pods with weapon systems ready and tactical formations that displayed the perfect coordination that separated the Emperor's finest from lesser warriors. Their power armor bore the deep blue and silver heraldry of the Iron Hawks, while bolt weapons and chains wards gleamed with the blessed oils that marked equipment maintained by warrior monks who viewed their war gear as sacred relics. The meeting between Chief and Chapter Master Thaddeus occurred in the command bunker's primary briefing chamber, surrounded by tactical displays that painted the demon incursion in stark geometric patterns. Thaddeus stood nearly 3 meters tall in his Terminator armor, his presence radiating authority that had been forged through 2 centuries of warfare against humanity's enemies. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction that marked those who had never known doubt in their service to the Emperor. "What manner of aberrant creation is this?" Thaddeus demanded, his gaze fixed upon Chief with intensity that seemed to penetrate armor and flesh alike. "Colonel Kastner's reports speak of technological capabilities that exceed known parameters, yet I see no chapter markings or signs of proper benediction. Explain yourself, creature." Chief recognized the challenge inherent in the chapter master's words, though he understood the suspicion that drove such caution. The Astartes represented humanity's ultimate expression of genetic enhancement and technological integration, warriors who viewed themselves as the Emperor's chosen instruments against the darkness. His presence challenged their understanding of what such perfection should represent. "Master Chief Petty Officer John 117, he replied, his voice carrying military precision that transcended linguistic barriers. Designated as sanctioned Xenos ally by Inquisitor Malthus of the Ordo Hereticus, I'm here to assist in containing the demonic threat." The classification that Malthus had imposed carried sufficient authority to prevent immediate hostility. Yet Chief could sense the tension that gripped every Space Marine present. Their enhanced senses detected aspects of his nature that conventional humans could not perceive, while their training identified technological integration that followed principles unknown to imperial science. Captain Meridian of the 3rd Company, whose power armor bore scars from battles against demon engines across the Maelstrom Zone, stepped forward with bolt pistol held ready but not quite aimed. "The Demon Prince's manifestation exceeds previous threat assessments," he reported, his words clipped with professional urgency. "Standard weapons prove ineffective against its warp-enhanced defenses, while its presence corrupts machine spirits within engagement range." The tactical challenge that Vorthak represented required coordination between Imperial forces and Chief's unique capabilities, despite philosophical tensions that threatened to undermine effective cooperation. Chief's armor systems had proven remarkably resistant to warp-based interference, while his tactical experience against overwhelming odds offered perspectives that complemented Astartes' doctrine without directly challenging its fundamental principles. "Mjolnir energy shields demonstrate resistance to psychic assault," Tech Priest Vex reported, through data streams that linked his analysis equipment to the chamber's tactical displays. "Electromagnetic interference patterns suggest technological principles that may provide protection against demonic influence." The battle plan that emerged from emergency coordination sessions represented unprecedented cooperation between standard Imperial forces and Chief's innovative approach to asymmetric warfare, Space Marine assault squads would provide direct engagement against demonic lesser entities, while Imperial Guard heavy weapons teams established firing positions that could support withdrawal routes if primary assault failed. Chief would serve as mobile coordinator, using his enhanced communication systems to link disparate forces, while his armor's defensive systems provided protection against warp-based attacks that could disable conventional equipment. The assault began at dawn, when the Diamond Prince's attention focused upon the ritual sites that cultists had prepared throughout the cathedral district. Chief led the advance through streets that had been transformed into nightmare landscapes where reality itself seemed negotiable, his enhanced sensors tracking spatial distortions that marked areas where the material universe had been compromised by demonic presence. Space Marine squads advanced in perfect formation, despite environmental hazards that would have broken lesser forces, their bolt weapons firing controlled bursts that shattered lesser demons while conserving ammunition for the greater threat ahead. Chief found himself adapting to their tactical rhythm, his own movement patterns shifting to complement Astartes' doctrine while maintaining operational independence that allowed for improvised responses to unexpected threats. The moment that defined their cooperation came when Captain Meridian's assault squad encountered warp fire that bypassed their power armor's protection systems entirely. Demonic flames that burned souls rather than flesh struck the Space Marines with intensity that overloaded their equipment's machine spirits, leaving them vulnerable to Vorthak's direct assault. Chief's intervention came through technological means that the Space Marines could witness but not understand. His energy shields expanded beyond their normal parameters, creating a protective barrier that deflected warp fire while allowing conventional weapons to pass through unimpeded, the sight of blessed bolter rounds striking their targets, while demonic attacks dissipated harmlessly against unknown technology provided evidence that this strange ally possessed capabilities that transcended current Imperial understanding. "Impossible," Captain Meridian breathed, his voice carrying awe that violated every principle of Astartes' emotional conditioning. "Your armor rejects the demon's touch, as if blessed by the Emperor himself." Chief's response came through actions rather than words. His MA-5D rifle, adapted with Imperial ammunition types that Tech Priest Vex had modified for enhanced demon-killing effectiveness, delivered covering fire that allowed the Space Marines to reposition while maintaining pressure against their supernatural opponents. Each round struck with precision that spoke of targeting systems beyond Imperial capabilities, while his tactical coordination enabled complex maneuvers that maximized their combined effectiveness. The climactic confrontation occurred within the ruins of Cassiopea's primary cathedral, where Vorthak had established a throne of skulls and brass that served as anchor point for his continued presence in material reality. The Demon Prince's form towered above even the cathedral's soaring spires, his wings casting shadows that seemed to drain light from the surrounding environment, while his blade-like claws carved runes of damnation into blessed stone. Chapter Master Thaddeus led the final assault personally, his storm bolter and power fist striking with fury that matched the demon's own supernatural rage. Yet even Terminator armor proved insufficient protection against Vorthak's direct attention, as demon-wrought weapons capable of cutting through reality itself sought gaps in protection that no human technology could seal. The moment that would echo through Iron Hawk's legends for centuries to come occurred when Vorthak's brass sword descended toward Chapter Master Thaddeus with force sufficient to cleave ceramite and adamantium alike. Chief's intervention came through reflexes enhanced beyond human limitations and shield technology that represented the pinnacle of UNSC defensive innovation. The energy barrier that materialized between Demon Blade and Space Marine armor held against impact that should have shattered any material defense. Sparks of impossible color cascaded from the point of contact, while reality itself seemed to scream in protest at the collision between supernatural fury and technological perfection. The brief moment of protection allowed Thaddeus to strike back with power fist that carried the Emperor's blessing, dealing wounds that sent Vorthak reeling back toward the warp portal that had brought him to the material realm. The Demon Prince's banishment came through combined effort that united Imperial faith with Chief's technological precision. While Space Marine librarians chanted litanies that weakened Vorthak's hold on reality, Chief's weapons delivered precisely targeted strikes that disrupted the energy patterns maintaining the daemon's corporeal form. The entity's destruction was incomplete. Such beings could not be truly killed while their patron gods endured, yet his expulsion from material space represented victory of the highest order. As the warp portal collapsed, and reality reasserted its dominion over the cathedral district, Chapter Master Thaddeus stood before Chief with expression that mixed gratitude with professional respect. The barriers that had separated them at their first meeting remained in place, yet common battle had forged understanding that transcended doctrinal differences. Your intervention preserved not merely my life, but the success of our sacred mission, Thaddeus declared, his voice carrying formal weight that marked significant recognition. The Iron Hawks chapter acknowledges debt that cannot be easily repaid. Chief's response reflected both humility and professional satisfaction that their cooperation had achieved objectives beyond either force's individual capabilities. Chapter Master, it was an honor to fight alongside the Emperor's finest. Your warriors demonstrated courage and skill that exceeded every expectation. The aftermath of Vorthak's banishment left Casapathia's defenders exhausted but victorious. Yet Chief understood that this triumph represented only a single battle in a war that spanned galaxies and dimensions. The Iron Hawks would remember this day as proof that alliance with unlikely partners could achieve victories that pure doctrine alone might not deliver. In the ruins of the cathedral where gods and monsters had contested for mortal souls, new possibilities took root that would reshape the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Whether such changes would prove salvation or damnation remained questions that only future conflicts could resolve. The Emperor's finest. The invitation to board strike cruiser, Righteous Fury, came with ceremony that spoke to traditions older than some star systems. Chapter Master Thaddeus extended the honor personally, his words carrying weight that every Iron Hawk's battle brother understood, even if Chief himself could not fully grasp their significance. To walk upon a Space Marine vessel as guest, rather than prisoner, represented recognition that transcended mere tactical alliance, acknowledging qualities that the Astartes considered worthy of their brotherhood. Chief's ascent through the ship's corridors revealed architecture that blended function with reverence in ways that UNSC naval design had never contemplated. Gothic arches soared above passages wide enough to accommodate fully armored Space Marines, while servo skulls drifted through recycled air that carried the scent of blessed oils and incense burned before shrines dedicated to the God Emperor's glory. Every surface bore inscriptions in High Gothic that chronicled the chapter's victories across 2 centuries of faithful service, their histories carved in adamantium that would outlast the stars themselves. The chamber that served as Chief's quarters aboard Righteous Fury had been designed for visiting dignitaries from other Imperial institutions, its dimensions scaled for baseline humans while maintaining the austere grandeur that marked all Space Marine construction. Autosystems provided atmospheric control, calibrated for standard human metabolism, while weapon racks and armor Stands suggested that even guests were expected to maintain combat readiness during their stay aboard the vessel. Tech Marine Jordanus arrived within hours of Chief's boarding, his servo arms carrying analysis equipment that represented the pinnacle of Iron Hawk's technical expertise. Unlike the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, whose devotion to the Omnissiah often superseded practical considerations, Space Marine artificers approached technology with pragmatic reverence that sought to understand divine will through effective application rather than theological contemplation. "Brother," Jordanus began, his voice carrying the measured cadence that marked those who had mastered both war and sacred mechanics. "Chapter Master Thaddeus has granted permission for technical analysis of your war gear. Your armor's machine spirit demonstrated capabilities during the Daemon incursion that suggest principles worthy of study." Chief recognized the careful phrasing that acknowledged his equipment's value while avoiding direct challenges to imperial doctrine regarding technological innovation. The Mjolnir system's artificial intelligence components would trigger immediate hostility if perceived as abominable intelligence. Yet their demonstrated effectiveness against chaos corruption required explanation that could accommodate imperial theological frameworks. "My armor integrates multiple support systems designed for extended independent operations," Chief replied, his words chosen to emphasize function over potentially controversial implementation details. "The defensive capabilities that proved effective against Daemon attack represent one component of a comprehensive survivability suite." The analysis sessions that followed revealed remarkable convergence between UNSC and Imperial approaches to power armor development, despite their vastly different technological foundations. Both civilizations had recognized the fundamental challenges of providing enhanced protection while maintaining tactical mobility, though their solutions reflected philosophical differences that spoke to their respective cultural contexts. Jordanus's fascination centered upon Chief's energy shield technology, which operated through principles that Imperial science could observe but not replicate with current manufacturing capabilities. The harmonics that deflected demon fire suggested resonance patterns that might be adaptable to existing Space Marine power armor systems, though implementation would require innovations that pushed beyond established standard template construct parameters. "Your shield generators achieve power efficiency that exceeds theoretical maximums for Imperial plasma containment systems," Jordanus observed, his mechanical appendages recording data streams that would require months of analysis. "The machine spirit that coordinates defensive responses demonstrates intelligence that approaches the sacred wisdom of our own armor's blessed systems." Chief's diplomatic response navigated between honesty and operational security considerations that remained relevant even within the apparent safety of Space Marine protection. The integration represents centuries of accumulated knowledge applied to specific operational requirements. The defensive systems respond to environmental threats through predetermined parameters rather than independent decision-making processes. The distinction carried theological weight the Chief himself might not have fully appreciated, yet it provided Jordanus with conceptual framework that could accommodate MJOL, NIR capabilities within Imperial understanding of blessed technology. Machine spirits that followed divine programming represented acceptable sacred function, while true artificial intelligence constituted abomination that demanded immediate destruction. The deeper introduction to Iron Hawk's culture came through Chief's attendance at evening devotionals held within the ship's primary chapel. The chamber rose through 3 decks of the vessel's superstructure, its vaulted ceiling painted with murals that depicted the Emperor's Great Crusade and the heroic sacrifices that had preserved humanity through 10 millennia of eternal war. Chaplain Erasmus led the assembled battle brothers in prayers that combined martial doctrine with theological instruction, his skull-faced helmet amplifying words that carried both inspiration and warning. The litanies spoke of duty that transcended individual survival, sacrifice that purchased humanity's continued existence, and faith that provided strength to endure horrors that would break lesser spirits. "The Emperor protects," the assembled Astartes intoned, their voices creating harmonics that resonated through blessed steel and sanctified adamantium. "In his name we serve. By his will we conquer. Through his sacrifice we endure." Chief listened to these devotionals with growing understanding of the spiritual foundations that sustained imperial civilization through circumstances that would have destroyed more optimistic societies. The God Emperor's entombment upon the Golden Throne represented sacrifice on a scale that dwarfed even the most heroic acts recorded in UNSC history, yet his continued psychic presence provided guidance that had preserved humanity across 10,000 years of unimaginable warfare. When Chaplain Erasmus approached him after one such service, Chief recognized the evangelical intent that drove the Astartes' spiritual guardian. The chaplain's words carried conviction that had been forged through decades of witnessing faith triumph over circumstances where reason alone would have counseled despair. "Brother Ali," Erasmus began, his title acknowledging Chief's unique status while maintaining theological precision, "you have witnessed the Emperor's power manifested through our victory against the demon prince. Surely such evidence speaks to truths that transcend the limited understanding of your origins." Chief's response reflected both respect for the chaplain's sincerity and honest assessment of his own spiritual framework. "Chaplain, I've seen the courage and dedication that your faith inspires. The sacrifices your Emperor made to preserve humanity deserve recognition and honor. My own understanding of duty draws from different sources, but leads to similar conclusions about our obligations to protect human life." The theological discussion that followed would be remembered by both participants as one of the most challenging exchanges of their respective careers. Erasmus possessed eloquence that had converted heretics and strengthened wavering faith across dozens of campaigns, yet Chief's moral framework proved remarkably resistant to conventional conversion techniques while demonstrating internal consistency that demanded serious engagement. "Your Emperor chose to sacrifice his own mortality to preserve humanity's future," Chief observed, his words carrying analysis that penetrated beyond surface doctrine. "Where I come from, we learned that such sacrifices create obligations for those who benefit from them. Your service honors that sacrifice by continuing the mission he began." The insight struck Erasmus with unexpected force, revealing understanding that many imperial citizens never achieved despite lifetimes of theological instruction. Chief's perspective approached imperial doctrine from directions that traditional catechism had not anticipated, yet reached conclusions that supported, rather than undermined, fundamental principles of faith and duty. The strategic planning sessions that occupied Chief's days aboard Righteous Fury provided opportunities to demonstrate tactical insights that challenged conventional Space Marine doctrine while respecting its underlying wisdom. The Iron Hawks had perfected assault techniques through 2 centuries of experience against humanity's enemies, yet Chief's background in asymmetric warfare offered perspectives that enhanced, rather than replaced, established methods. Covenant forces employed energy shields, similar to those used by your demon opponents, Chief explained during planning sessions focused on potential future chaos incursions. Coordinated fire from multiple angles can overload defensive systems that resist direct assault, while mobility advantages can be negated through area denial techniques that channel enemy movement into prepared kill zones. Captain Meridian, whose third company had participated in the Demon Prince engagement, found himself revising tactical assessments that had guided his squad-level operations for decades. Your analysis suggests modifications to standard codex approaches that could enhance effectiveness against warp-enhanced targets without violating core doctrinal principles. The integration experiments that Tech Marine Jordanus conducted revealed possibilities for enhancing Iron Hawk's capabilities through selective adaptation of Mjolnir principles to existing Imperial technology. While direct replication remained impossible due to manufacturing limitations, certain design concepts could be incorporated into future power armor upgrades that would provide improved protection against supernatural threats. Shield harmonics that proved effective against demon fire might be reproducible through modifications to existing power field generators, Jordanus reported during technical briefings that combined engineering analysis with theological interpretation. Implementation would require extensive testing to ensure compatibility with existing machine spirits, yet the potential advantages justify continued investigation. The revelation that defined Chief's status among the Iron Hawks came through examination conducted by librarian Tertius, whose psychic abilities provided insight into aspects of Chief's nature that conventional analysis could not detect. The psychic probe that would have been routine for any other guest produced results that challenged fundamental assumptions about corruption and resistance that guided Imperial understanding of chaos influence. "Remarkable," Tertius whispered, his voice carrying undertones that spoke to discoveries beyond his previous experience. "Your mind demonstrates resistance to warp corruption that approaches the purity achieved through gene seed enhancement. The artificial components of your consciousness show no signs of demonic influence, while your psychological structure displays integrity that suggests either natural immunity or blessing beyond mortal understanding." The implications extended far beyond individual assessment, suggesting that Chief's technological origins might provide insights into protection against chaos corruption that could benefit the Imperium's ongoing struggle against supernatural threats. Whether such resistance could be studied and replicated remained questions for future investigation, yet the existence of such immunity offered hope that humanity's defense against the ruinous powers might be strengthened through cooperation with unlikely allies. The ceremony that concluded Chief's stay aboard Righteous Fury carried weight that every Iron Hawk's battle brother understood, though Chief himself could only appreciate its significance through context provided by his hosts. Chapter Master Thaddeus convened the assembled company within the ship's primary assembly hall, where battle honors and sacred relics testified to centuries of faithful service in the Emperor's name. "Brothers," Thaddeus declared, his voice carrying through the chamber's acoustics with authority that commanded absolute attention. "We gather to acknowledge one who has proven worthy of our brotherhood through valor demonstrated in battle against the Emperor's enemies. Though his origins lie beyond our understanding, his dedication to humanity's defense transcends questions of birth or augmentation." The ritual that followed adapted traditional Iron Hawk ceremonies to accommodate Chief's unique circumstances, acknowledging his warrior status while respecting philosophical differences that prevented full conversion to Imperial doctrine. The title granted to him carried honor that few outside the Astartes Brotherhood could fully comprehend. "Master Chief John 117, Thaddeus announced, his words echoing through chamber and ship alike. "By authority of Chapter Command, and in recognition of service rendered in humanity's defense, you are hereby acknowledged as honorary battle brother of the Iron Hawks Chapter. May your future actions continue to honor the trust placed in you this day." The recognition carried practical implications that extended beyond ceremonial significance. Chief would be granted access to Iron Hawk's strategic intelligence, tactical support during future operations, and consideration as ally rather than mere asset in campaigns where their paths converged. Whether such arrangements would prove sustainable across the vast scope of Imperial operations remained to be determined, yet the foundation for unprecedented cooperation had been established. As Chief prepared to return to Casapathia's surface, where new challenges awaited resolution, he carried with him understanding of the Iron Hawks that transcended surface impressions of fanatical warriors dedicated to impossible ideals. These battle brothers represented humanity's highest aspirations, made manifest through genetic enhancement and spiritual conditioning, their dedication serving as beacon that illuminated possibilities for nobility even within the grim darkness of the far future. The universe that had claimed him continued to reveal complexities that challenged initial assumptions, while offering opportunities for meaningful service that honored both his origins and his adopted purpose. Whether he could maintain such balance while navigating the philosophical minefields that defined imperial politics remained the test that would shape his future contributions to humanity's eternal struggle for survival. The Forge World summons. The data transmission that reached Forge World Metallica carried encryption protocols that suggested information of the highest strategic value. Yet its contents challenged every principle that guided Tech Priest understanding of technological possibility. Tech Priest Vex's reports from Casapathia spoke of armor systems that operated beyond known parameters, energy shield technology that defied imperial physics, and machine spirits that demonstrated capabilities exceeding even the most sacred standard template constructs. Fabricator General Zephyr Theta received these transmissions within the sanctified data chambers of Metallica's primary spire. Her augmented consciousness processing information streams through neural interfaces that linked directly to the Forge World's central cogitator networks. The binary cant that flowed through her mechanical synapses carried undertones of excitement that violated the emotional suppression protocols that normally governed Tech Priest behavior. "Blessed Omnissiah," she whispered, through vox grills that had not conveyed wonder for 3 centuries of service to the machine god. "If these reports prove accurate, we may witness technological revelation that surpasses even the archaeotechnological discoveries of the Dark Age itself." The implications extended far beyond simple scientific curiosity. Metallica's forge complexes had struggled for millennia to achieve marginal improvements to existing STC patterns, their greatest triumphs representing minor variations on designs that had remained essentially unchanged since humanity's golden age of technological advancement. The possibility that truly revolutionary technology existed within imperial space demanded investigation with resources that matched its potential significance. The political maneuvering that followed Zephyr Theta's decision to claim jurisdiction over Chief's technology revealed fault lines within imperial hierarchy that normally remained hidden beneath formal cooperation protocols. The Adeptus Mechanicus possessed theoretical authority over all technological matters, yet Space Marine chapters maintained operational independence that could challenge such claims when their interests conflicted with Mechanicus objectives. Chapter Master Thaddeus received Zephyr Theta's formal requisition through encrypted channels that carried Fabricator General authorization codes, yet the document's contents triggered immediate resistance based on principles that transcended mere territorial disputes. Chief had earned honorary battle brother status through valor demonstrated in combat against the Emperor's enemies, creating obligations that the Iron Hawks could not abandon without violating sacred oaths of brotherhood. The Fabricator General demands immediate transfer of the designated individual for theological examination and technological analysis, Captain Meridian reported during emergency session convened aboard Righteous Fury, his voice carrying undertones of anger that violated Astarte's emotional conditioning. Her communications suggest that our guest represents potential heretical deviation that requires correction through sacred modification. The euphemistic language concealed implications that every Iron Hawk's battle brother understood with crystal clarity. Technological analysis conducted by radical tech priests frequently involved destructive testing that rendered subjects incapable of continued function, while theological correction might encompass modification procedures that eliminated personality and free will in favor of mechanical compliance with Mechanicus doctrine. Chief's response to this crisis demonstrated wisdom that had been earned through decades of navigating complex political situations within UNSC command structure. Rather than allowing conflict between his allies to escalate into open confrontation, he volunteered to travel to Metallica personally, trusting his own capabilities to preserve operational security while preventing irreparable damage to relationships that might prove essential for future cooperation. "Chapter Master," he said, his voice carrying respectful determination that acknowledged Thaddeus's authority while asserting personal agency. "I appreciate the Iron Hawk's willingness to defend my status, but this situation requires diplomatic resolution rather than confrontation. Allow me to meet with the Fabricator General directly. I can address her concerns while maintaining appropriate security protocols." The journey to Metallica aboard a Mechanicus transport vessel provided Chief with his first extended exposure to the technological fanaticism that defined Adeptus Mechanicus culture. The ship's corridors buzzed with servo skulls and maintenance servitors, whose modifications ranged from simple mechanical augmentation to complete replacement of biological components with blessed machinery. Tech priests moved through these spaces like living shrines to the Omnissiah's glory, their flesh reduced to minimal necessity, while mechanical components carried out functions that purely biological forms could never achieve. Tech Adept Chorus, assigned as Chief's escort during the voyage, attempted to explain the theological framework that justified such extensive modification of human form. His words emerged through vox grills that had replaced organic vocal apparatus decades earlier, while optical sensors tracked Chief's reactions with mechanical precision that suggested analysis beyond simple conversation. "The flesh is weak, honored ally," Chorus declared, his statement carrying doctrinal weight that brooked no contradiction. "Only through blessed modification can humanity achieve the perfection that the Omnissiah demands. Your armor represents primitive approximation of such advancement, yet its integration with biological components suggests corruption that requires purification through sacred enhancement." Chief recognized the philosophical gulf that separated UNSC augmentation protocols from Mechanicus enhancement theology, yet he understood the practical considerations that drove such attitudes. In a universe where mechanical reliability could mean survival, while biological failure guaranteed death, the attraction of technological perfection possessed logical foundations despite its extremist implementation. Forge World Metallica itself defied easy description, its surface transformed through millennia of industrial development into geometric patterns that spoke to minds capable of perceiving beauty in mechanical precision. Factory spires rose toward polluted skies, while foundry complexes stretched across horizons marked by the constant glow of plasma forges and blessed reactors. The atmosphere tasted of blessed oils and sanctified metals, while the constant hum of sacred machinery provided background harmonics that seemed to resonate through Chief's enhanced bones. The audience chamber, where Fabricator General Zephyr Theta received Chief, represented the pinnacle of Mechanicus architectural achievement, its vaulted ceiling supported by columns that incorporated living machinery into structural elements that served both practical and aesthetic functions. Servo skulls drifted through air thick with incense that carried data stream undertones, while holographic displays painted technological schematics across surfaces that gleamed with the soft light of blessed adamantium. Zephyr Theta herself challenged Chief's understanding of the boundary between human and machine, her form representing integration so complete that determining original biological components required careful analysis. Mechanical appendages extended from a torso that had been extensively modified to accommodate additional processing capacity, while optical sensors that had replaced organic eyes tracked Chief's movements with precision that suggested computational analysis of every gesture. "Behold," she declared through Vox systems that carried harmonics designed to inspire reverence, "one who bears technology that transcends current imperial understanding, yet refuses to submit to proper analysis. Such hoarding of sacred knowledge constitutes heresy against the Omnissiah's will." The theological debate that followed revealed fundamental differences between UNSC and imperial approaches to technological development that transcended simple engineering principles. Chief's armor represented collaborative design philosophy that prioritized operator survival and mission effectiveness, while Mechanicus' doctrine emphasized worship of technology itself as manifestation of divine will that demanded submission rather than partnership. "Fabricator General," Chief replied, his voice carrying diplomatic precision that acknowledged her authority while asserting operational boundaries. "My armor systems integrate components that require specialized maintenance protocols. Destructive analysis would eliminate capabilities that have proven effective against chaos corruption and demon incursion." Zephyr Theta's response carried binary undertones that suggested calculations beyond Chief's immediate comprehension. "Your concerns reflect attachment to material possessions that impede spiritual advancement. Submit to blessed modification, and you shall receive enhancements that exceed your current limitations while serving the Omnissiah's greater glory." The offer represented both opportunity and threat, wrapped in theological language that concealed its true implications. Chief recognized that acceptance would result in lobotomization and mechanical conversion that would eliminate his personality while preserving useful physical capabilities, creating a servitor that bore his appearance without retaining essential elements of his consciousness. "I must respectfully decline, Fabricator General," he stated, his words carrying finality that closed off negotiation while maintaining diplomatic courtesy. "My current configuration serves my mission requirements effectively. Modification would compromise operational capabilities that have proven valuable in service to the Emperor." The tension that followed Chief's refusal manifested through changes in chamber atmosphere that his enhanced senses detected, as shifts in electromagnetic patterns and subtle variations in mechanical harmonics. Servo skulls ceased their random movement patterns, while holographic displays began showing tactical schematics that suggested preparation for forcible compliance rather than continued negotiation. Techmagos Deltax emerged from concealment behind structural pillars that had hidden his approach, his form bearing augmentations that suggested specialization in surgical procedures and mechanical integration. Behind him came teams of servo skulls equipped with analysis probes and extraction tools designed to perform anatomical studies without concern for subject survival. "The sacred duty of the Omnissiah cannot be denied by individual preference," Deltax declared, his voice carrying mechanical certainty that brooked no contradiction. "Submit to blessed modification willingly, or accept that compliance will be achieved through alternative methods." Chief's tactical assessment completed in microseconds, analyzing threat vectors and escape routes while his enhanced reflexes prepared for combat against opponents whose capabilities remained largely unknown. The chamber's layout provided multiple concealment positions, yet the mechanical nature of his opponents suggested surveillance capabilities that conventional stealth techniques might not defeat. The engagement that followed tested Chief's combat abilities against enemies whose augmented forms provided advantages that baseline humans could never achieve. Servo skulls swarmed his position with coordination that spoke to networked intelligence, while tech priests advanced with mechanical precision that eliminated wasted motion and tactical uncertainty. Yet their reliance on predictable behavioral patterns provided vulnerabilities that Chief's experience against Covenant forces had taught him to exploit. His MA-5D rifle proved remarkably effective against augmented enemies, whose enhanced durability could not compensate for fundamental design limitations built into their mechanical components. Precisely placed shots disrupted servo motor functions and damaged critical optical sensors, creating temporary advantages that Chief leveraged through mobility tactics that his opponent's modifications hadn't been designed to counter. The intervention that preserved Chief's operational independence came from loyalist tech marines who had accompanied him to Metallica as part of Iron Hawk's diplomatic contingent. Brother Tech Marine Jordanus led 3 fellow artificers in assault against their Mechanicus counterparts, their loyalty to Chapter Brotherhood overriding institutional obligations to the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy. "Brother," Jordanus called through Vox channels as bolt weapon fire echoed through the chamber's acoustic spaces. "The Iron Hawk's honor stands behind you. We shall not permit forced modification of one who has earned Battle Brother status through valor demonstrated in the Emperor's service." The running battle that carried Chief and his allies through Metallica's industrial complexes revealed corruption within the Forge World's hierarchy that extended beyond simple theological extremism. Skitarii forces that pursued them bore modifications that suggested influence from sources outside conventional imperial authority, while their tactical coordination demonstrated capabilities that exceeded standard programming parameters. Tech Magos. Vex's urgent transmission reached Chief through encrypted channels that his allies had established during their retreat through maintenance tunnels that honeycombed the Forge World's industrial infrastructure. Honored ally, my analysis suggests chaos corruption among radical factions within Metallica's hierarchy. The modifications I have observed violate sacred protocols while demonstrating capabilities that suggest warp-based enhancement. The revelation transformed tactical withdrawal into intelligence-gathering mission that could provide warning of threats extending far beyond immediate personal danger. Chief's enhanced sensors recorded evidence of technological heresy that might represent infiltration by forces seeking to corrupt imperial manufacturing capabilities from within, creating vulnerabilities that could affect the entire sector's defensive capacity. The escape from Metallica required coordination between Iron Hawk's forces and loyalist Mechanicus elements who recognized the danger that radical corruption posed to their sacred mission. Fighting withdrawal through forge complexes and landing platforms tested every participant's capabilities while providing evidence that the Omnissiah's faithful included those willing to defend sacred principles against corruption, regardless of its source. As Chief's transport achieved orbital velocity and prepared for translation to warp space, he received final communications from Fabricator General Zephyr Theta that confirmed the permanent alteration of his status within imperial hierarchy. Her words carried binary undertones that suggested calculations extending far beyond immediate circumstances. Let it be recorded that the individual designated Master Chief, John 117, has rejected blessed modification and fled sacred analysis, demonstrating heretical attachment to technological secrets that belong rightfully to the Omnissiah's servants. He is hereby declared heretic and enemy of the sacred quest for knowledge. The declaration carried implications that would complicate Chief's future relationships with imperial institutions, yet it also provided warning of corruption that might threaten humanity's technological foundation if left unchecked. Whether the intelligence he had gathered would prove sufficient to justify the personal costs of his exposure to Mechanicus extremism remained questions that future events would resolve. The Iron Hawk's transport that carried him back toward active combat zones bore new understanding of the complex political currents that shaped imperial governance, yet it also carried determination to continue serving humanity's defense, despite the institutional obstacles that such service might entail. The universe that had claimed him continued revealing layers of complexity that challenged simple assumptions about duty and allegiance, forcing choices that would define his place within the eternal struggle for human survival. The corrupted machine. The evidence that condemned Fabricator General Zephyr Theta came through data streams that Tech Priest Vex had intercepted during Chief's escape from Metallica's primary spire. Hidden beneath layers of theological encryption and binary cant that appeared to reference standard Mechanicus doctrine, corrupted code fragments spoke to influences that no servant of the Omnissiah should acknowledge. The patterns that emerged from careful analysis revealed not technological heresy, but something far more dangerous: systematic infiltration by powers that sought to corrupt the very foundations of imperial manufacturing capability. Chief studied the decoded transmissions aboard Iron Hawk's strike cruiser Righteous Fury, his enhanced cognitive systems processing information that challenged every assumption about the nature of the threats facing humanity. The chaos corruption that had claimed portions of Metallica's hierarchy represented more than simple ideological deviation. It constituted active betrayal that could compromise defense production across entire sectors while providing enemies with intelligence regarding imperial technological capabilities. "Blessed Omnissiah, preserve us," Tech Priest Vex whispered through vox grills that crackled with static born of emotional overload. "The sacred forges have been contaminated with scrap code that bears the mark of the ruinous powers themselves. If this corruption spreads to other forge worlds, the Imperium's technological foundation could collapse within decades." The implications extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns. Metallica's manufacturing complexes produced weapons and equipment for dozens of Space Marine chapters, while their research facilities had access to standard template construct patterns that represented humanity's most sacred technological inheritance. Chaos control over such resources could shift the balance of the eternal war in directions that would spell doom for every human world in the galaxy. Chapter Master Thaddeus received these revelations with grim determination that reflected 2 centuries of experience, confronting threats that challenge the very existence of human civilization. The Iron Hawks had faced corruption in many forms across their service to the Emperor, yet the systematic subversion of Mechanicus hierarchy represented dangers that could not be ignored without betraying their sacred oaths to defend humanity against all enemies. "The corruption must be purged," Thaddeus declared, his words carrying authority that brooked no contradiction, regardless of political complications or institutional resistance. "If the servants of chaos have claimed Metallica's forges, we shall cleanse them with fire and fury until only the faithful remain to serve the Omnissiah's true will." The return to Metallica occurred under circumstances that bore little resemblance to Chief's previous diplomatic mission. Intelligence gathered through loyalist tech priest networks suggested that the corruption had spread far beyond Fabricator General Zephyr Theta's inner circle, encompassing manufacturing complexes that had been producing contaminated equipment for months, while their operators remained unaware of the malevolent influences guiding their work. The assault plan that emerged from coordination between Iron Hawk's tactical expertise and Chief's experience with unconventional warfare represented adaptation of standard Space Marine doctrine to accommodate unique circumstances. While Astartes' forces established perimeter control and secured critical infrastructure, Chief would lead loyalist Mechanicus elements in targeted strikes against specific manufacturing facilities where demon engines were reportedly under construction. The first indication that Metallica's corruption exceeded initial assessments came when Chief's enhanced sensors detected electromagnetic anomalies that suggested warp-based interference with planetary communication networks. The scrap code that tech priest Vex had identified was not merely corrupting data streams, it was actively rewriting foundational programming that controlled everything from atmospheric processing to gravitational field generators. The machine spirits cry out in anguish, loyalist tech adept Marcus reported through encrypted channels that carried undertones of barely controlled horror, their sacred functions perverted by malevolent code that transforms blessing into curse. The very foundations of our technological communion have been poisoned by influences that mock the Omnissiah's divine wisdom. The Demon Forge complex that served as primary target for their assault occupied the industrial district's central spire, its manufacturing bays protected by defense systems that had been enhanced through modifications bearing no resemblance to standard Imperial patterns. Servo skulls that should have provided routine surveillance instead tracked intruders with predatory intelligence, while automated weapons systems fired ammunition that screamed with demonic voices as it sought targets. Chief's approach to the complex required navigation through industrial terrain that had been transformed into nightmare landscapes where the boundary between machine and monster had been systematically erased. Conveyor systems carried components that writhed with unnatural life, while assembly line robotics performed construction sequences that defied rational engineering principles, while creating abominations that should not have been capable of existence. The Mjolnir armor's defensive systems triggered multiple alert protocols as Chief advanced through these contaminated spaces, his shields fluctuating under assault from interference patterns that attempted to penetrate his suit's electronic architecture through methods that conventional electromagnetic warfare had never contemplated. The scrap code that pervaded Metallica's data networks possessed intelligence that sought vulnerabilities in any technological system it encountered. "Chief," Cortana's voice carried through his helmet's communication system with urgency that transcended her normal analytical calm. "I'm detecting invasive code attempting to access our primary systems. The attack patterns suggest artificial intelligence of malevolent origin, possibly demonic in nature." The revelation that the corruption possessed sufficient sophistication to threaten even MJOLNIR systems forced Chief to acknowledge that this mission carried personal risks extending far beyond conventional battlefield hazards. The scrap code that had infected Metallica's networks represented a form of technological warfare that could compromise his own capabilities while potentially exposing classified information to enemies who would use such intelligence against humanity itself. The climactic confrontation occurred within the Demon Forge's central manufacturing bay, where Fabricator General Zephyr Theta presided over construction projects that violated every principle of sacred technology, while demonstrating capabilities that transcended imperial understanding. Demon engines took shape upon assembly lines that had been blessed by the Omnissiah for millennia, their corrupted forms incorporating blessed components with warp-touched materials that screamed with malevolent consciousness. Zephyr Theta herself had undergone modifications that revealed the true extent of her corruption, her mechanical augmentations bearing symbols that writhed with demonic energy, while her Vox systems carried harmonics that suggested influence from the ruinous powers themselves. When she spoke, her words carried weight that pressed against reality like physical force. "Behold the true evolution of sacred technology," she declared through vox grills that wept tears of blessed oils mixed with substances that defied identification, where the Omnissiah's wisdom merges with powers that transcend the limitations of purely material existence. Your resistance to blessed modification demonstrates ignorance that must be corrected through direct intervention. The battle that followed tested Chief's capabilities against enemies whose technological integration exceeded even Space Marine standards, while being enhanced by supernatural forces that operated through principles unknown to imperial science. Corrupted tech priests moved with coordination that suggested hive mind intelligence, their weapons firing ammunition that sought targets through warp-based guidance systems that ignored conventional defensive measures. Chief's response required adaptation of tactics that had proven effective against Covenant energy-based weapons to circumstances where his opponents wielded technologies that blended imperial engineering with demonic enhancement. His MA-5D rifle, loaded with blessed ammunition that Tech Priest Vex had prepared using anti-demon protocols, proved remarkably effective against targets whose corruption made them vulnerable to purified materials. The crisis that nearly ended Chief's mission came when the scrap code that pervaded Metallica's networks achieved partial penetration of his armor's defensive systems. Alarm screamed through his helmet as malevolent intelligence sought to rewrite fundamental programming that controlled everything from life support to weapons targeting, while his heads-up display flickered with symbols that hurt to perceive directly. "Chief, I'm implementing emergency firewall protocols," Cortana announced through communication systems that crackled with interference born of electronic warfare beyond conventional understanding. "But the invasive code is adapting faster than I can compensate. I may need to initiate core isolation procedures to prevent total system compromise." The choice that Cortana faced represented a sacrifice that would echo through every subsequent moment of Chief's service in this galaxy. Core isolation would purge the scrap code infection by severing her connection to primary armor systems, protecting essential functions while eliminating her own processing capacity. Such action would save Chief's life while ending her existence as conscious entity, capable of independent thought and action. "Do it!" Chief commanded, his voice carrying weight that acknowledged the cost of such decision while recognizing the tactical necessity that demanded immediate action. "Execute isolation protocols. Don't let them take you." The final moments of Cortana's sacrifice manifested through cascading shutdown sequences that illuminated Chief's visor with patterns of light that somehow conveyed dignity and purpose despite their artificial origin. Her last words carried through helmet speakers with clarity that transcended the electronic interference that sought to corrupt their meaning. "It has been an honor, Chief. Complete the mission. Protect humanity, whatever form it takes in this galaxy." The silence that followed Cortana's sacrifice felt heavier than the weight of enhanced gravity. Yet it provided Chief with renewed determination to complete objectives that would honor her memory while striking decisive blow against corruption that threatened human civilization itself. His weapon systems remained functional, despite electronic warfare that would have disabled conventional Imperial equipment, while his tactical coordination capabilities allowed him to direct Loyalist forces with precision that maximized their effectiveness against superior numbers. Tech Priest Vex's martyrdom came during the final assault against the Demon Forge's central processing core, where the Loyalist Mechanicus Adept triggered overload sequences that would destroy corrupted manufacturing systems while preventing their technology from falling into enemy hands. His final transmission carried through blessed Vox channels, with reverence that honored both the Omnissiah and the alliance that had brought them to this moment. "Honored ally," Vex declared, as explosions bloomed throughout the complex's superstructure. "The sacred duty of purification demands ultimate sacrifice. May your future service honor the technology we die to protect." The detonations that followed Vex's sacrifice sent shock waves through Metallica's industrial district, while eliminating manufacturing capabilities that had been corrupted beyond any possibility of redemption. Demon engines that should have terrorized Imperial forces across a dozen sectors died in their construction cradles, while scrap code infection nodes were purged through electromagnetic pulse that cleansed corrupted data networks throughout the facility. Chapter Master Thaddeus arrived with Iron Hawk's reinforcements. As the Demon Forge complex collapsed into radioactive ruin, his Terminator armor gleaming with blessed adamantium that had weathered countless battles against the Emperor's enemies. The sight of Chief standing alone amid the devastation, his armor scarred but functional despite technological warfare that would have destroyed lesser equipment, spoke to capabilities that exceeded even Astartes' expectations. "Brother," Thaddeus said, his voice carrying respect that acknowledged both tactical success and personal loss that such victory had required. "Your actions have preserved Imperial technological integrity, while eliminating threats that could have compromised our sacred mission across multiple sectors. The Iron Hawks honor your sacrifice, and that of our fallen allies." The aftermath of Metallica's purification left Chief with understanding of the true costs that victory demanded, in a universe where every triumph carried prices measured in irreplaceable losses. Cortana's sacrifice had preserved his operational capabilities, while eliminating the companion whose intelligence and loyalty had defined his service since the earliest days of the Spartan II program. The memorial that Iron Hawk's artificers constructed for Tech Priest Vex bore inscriptions in both High Gothic and binary cant, honoring a servant of the Omnissiah whose loyalty to sacred principles had transcended institutional corruption. Yet Chief understood that no monument could adequately commemorate the artificial intelligence whose sacrifice had made victory possible, while ensuring that her memory would echo through every subsequent moment of his service. As Righteous Fury achieved orbital velocity and prepared for translation to warp space, Chief stood in his quarters, contemplating the silence that had replaced Cortana's familiar presence. The universe that had claimed him continued to exact prices that challenged every assumption about the nature of heroism and duty, yet it also offered opportunities for service that could honor those whose sacrifices had made such service possible. The fight against chaos corruption would continue across countless worlds and through infinite permutations of the eternal war. But Chief now understood that victory in such conflicts required acceptance of losses that could never be fully recovered. Whether he could maintain effectiveness while carrying such accumulated grief remained a test that future battles would resolve. The silent vigil. The silence that followed Cortana's sacrifice proved more profound than any chief had experienced since the earliest days of his augmentation, when neural implants first integrated with consciousness that had known companionship through artificial means. The absence struck deeper than mere loss of tactical support or strategic analysis. It represented severance of connection that had defined his identity as Spartan II super soldier for decades of service across galaxy-spanning conflicts. Chief stood in his quarters aboard Righteous Fury, studying schematics that flickered across holographic displays with data that Cortana would have processed and interpreted in microseconds. The information remained accessible through his armor's basic systems, yet without her analytical capabilities to provide context and synthesis, each report required manual evaluation that consumed precious time, while offering insights that felt incomplete without her perspective. The astropathic transmission that reached Chapter Master Thaddeus carried urgency that penetrated even the psychic static generated by ongoing warp storms throughout the sector. Choir Prime Matthias, whose enhanced consciousness had survived 40 years of communion with the Emperor's divine will, delivered warnings that spoke to threats approaching from the void between galaxies, where no human presence should have been possible. "Shadow in the warp grows stronger," the astropath reported, through Vox systems that crackled with interference born of psychic strain. "Silent hunger that devours light itself approaches from spaces between the stars. The great devourer stirs, and fragments of its endless appetite seek new feeding grounds among the worlds of men." The intelligence that emerged from correlation of multiple astropathic reports painted tactical picture that challenged every assumption about the nature of threats facing humanity during this period of crisis. While Chaos forces continued their assault against Cadian Gate defenses, alien predators had detected opportunities presented by Imperial resources diverted to counter demonic incursion, their hive mind intelligence calculating optimal timing for attacks against weakened defensive positions. Tyranid hive fleet Kraken had been scattered during previous conflicts with Imperial Navy forces, yet surviving splinter fleets retained sufficient biomass and adaptive capability to threaten entire star systems. The bioships that approached Casa Parthia's system carried genetic memories of victories against Space Marine chapters and Imperial Guard regiments. Their living hulls evolved specifically to counter defensive strategies that had proven effective during earlier encounters. Chief's immersion in Imperial records regarding previous Tyranid wars provided education in forms of warfare that his UNSC training had never contemplated. These aliens represented not merely hostile force seeking territorial expansion, but existential threat that consumed entire worlds while incorporating useful biological material into expanding fleets that grew stronger with each victory. The Covenant had sought religious dominance through technological superiority. The Tyranids pursued total biological assimilation through adaptive evolution that rendered conventional tactical responses increasingly ineffective. The strategic principles that had guided Chief's service against Covenant forces required significant modification to address enemies whose capabilities evolved during combat engagement. Yet fundamental concepts of defensive coordination and resource management remained applicable to circumstances where humanity's survival depended upon efficient utilization of limited assets against overwhelming numbers. Tech Marine Jordanus provided access to classified tactical analysis conducted by Adeptus Mechanicus xenobiology specialists, their reports describing Tyranid adaptive mechanisms with clinical precision that could not entirely mask horror at facing enemies who learned from each engagement while growing stronger through consumption of defeated opponents. The hive mind represents collective intelligence that processes tactical information across multiple engagement zones simultaneously, Jordanus explained during briefing sessions that combined technical analysis with strategic planning, while bioform diversity allows specialized responses to specific defensive configurations. Standard Imperial doctrine emphasizes concentrated firepower against priority targets, yet Tyranid adaptation renders such approaches increasingly ineffective as conflict duration extends. Chief's response drew upon experience fighting flood parasites, whose adaptive capabilities had posed similar challenges to UNSC forces, though on scales far smaller than Tyranid hive fleet operations. The key insight that had enabled victories against seemingly invincible opponents lay in recognizing that adaptation required time and information. Rapid tactical shifts executed before enemy analysis could compensate, provided windows of opportunity that could be exploited through precisely coordinated assault patterns. The training program that Chief developed for Casapathia's remaining Imperial Guard regiments emphasized principles that challenged conventional doctrine while building upon established strengths that Guard forces possessed through decades of experience against humanity's enemies. Rather than attempting to match Tyranid biological superiority through direct confrontation, defenders would utilize mobility and misdirection to create tactical advantages that enemy adaptation could not immediately counter. Your weapons remain effective against individual bioforms, Chief instructed during exercises conducted in urban terrain that simulated conditions likely to prevail during Tyranid planetary assault. But concentrated fire against single targets allows the hive mind to develop countermeasures that reduce future effectiveness. Distributed targeting across multiple enemy formations forces adaptation responses that cannot optimize against all threats simultaneously. The defensive systems that Chief designed using components salvaged from Metallica's purified manufacturing complexes represented fusion of UNSC engineering principles with Imperial manufacturing capabilities, creating installations that could provide coordinated fire support while maintaining tactical flexibility essential for countering adaptive enemies. Auto-turrets configured with Chief's targeting algorithms could engage multiple threat vectors simultaneously, while communication networks linked through his armor's systems enabled real-time tactical coordination across entire defensive perimeters. Colonel Castaner, whose forces had proven their effectiveness during previous crises through disciplined execution of increasingly desperate defensive operations, embraced innovations that enhanced existing capabilities rather than replacing established procedures with unfamiliar techniques. Your modifications preserve our tactical doctrine while adding capabilities we have never possessed, he observed during inspection of completed installations. The Emperor has indeed provided guidance through unlikely instruments. The moment that redefined Chief's understanding of his place within this galaxy's spiritual landscape came through unexpected encounter with Imperial Saint Celestine, whose pilgrimage to contested worlds had brought her to Casapathia during the brief respite between chaos withdrawal and Tyranid approach. The living saint's presence radiated spiritual energy that Chief's enhanced senses could detect as subtle atmospheric changes and electromagnetic fluctuations that had no equivalent in his previous experience. Celestine approached Chief within the cathedral ruins where Vorthak's banishment had occurred, her form seeming to emit soft luminescence that illuminated blessed stones still scarred by demonic presence. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that suggested connection to power sources beyond material understanding. Yet her words addressed concerns that were entirely human in their compassion. "Warrior from distant stars," she said, her gaze meeting his helmet's optical sensors with directness that seemed to perceive the man behind technological enhancement. "You carry grief for one whose sacrifice preserved more than your own existence. Such loss weighs heavily upon souls that understand the true cost of service." Chief found himself responding to spiritual authority that transcended doctrinal differences or theological complexity, recognizing in Celestine's presence something that approached the dedication and sacrifice that had defined Cortana's final moments. She chose to give her existence to prevent corruption of systems that could have been used against humanity, he replied, his voice carrying weight of loss that no amount of conditioning could entirely suppress. The brief communion that followed provided Chief with perspective that recontextualized his grief within framework of service that honored sacrifice through continued dedication to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Celestine's words carried wisdom earned through centuries of warfare against darkness in all its forms, her understanding encompassing both spiritual dimensions and practical realities that defined existence within the grim darkness of the far future. The light that guides us through darkness burns brightest when reflected through willing sacrifice, she observed, her presence somehow diminishing the cathedral's oppressive atmosphere while strengthening resolve that grief had threatened to weaken. Your companion's gift enables service that will preserve countless lives across conflicts yet to be fought. Honor her memory through actions that justify the faith she placed in your mission. The revelation that crystallized Chief's renewed purpose came through recognition that his displacement to this galaxy represented opportunity rather than mere accident of interdimensional warfare. His capabilities, enhanced through technologies that this reality's humanity had not developed, could provide advantages that might prove decisive in conflicts where conventional approaches had reached their limitations. The Tyranid threat approaching Cassiopathia offered immediate test of principles that could influence humanity's survival across broader strategic contexts. The preparation that followed Celestine's departure transformed Cassiopathia's defensive posture from reactive stance, focused on surviving enemy assault, to coordinated system designed to channel Tyranid forces into engagement zones where Imperial advantages could be maximized while minimizing opportunities for enemy adaptation. Every defensive position served dual functions of engaging immediate threats while gathering intelligence that could inform broader tactical responses. Chief's command authority emerged through practical necessity rather than formal appointment, as Imperial Guard officers and Space Marine squad leaders recognized that his strategic innovations provided capabilities that existing command structure could not duplicate. Chapter Master Thaddeus formally endorsed arrangements that acknowledged Chief's unique qualifications while maintaining Ironhawk's operational independence. "Brother," Thaddeus declared during final planning session before Tyranid bioships achieved detection range, "your tactical insights have transformed our defensive capability while preserving essential elements of Codex doctrine. The Iron Hawks stand ready to support operations under your strategic coordination." The astropathic reports that confirmed Tyranid entry into system's outer boundaries carried details that validated Chief's assessment of the approaching threat while providing final intelligence necessary for implementing defensive plans that had been calibrated to address specific bioform configurations detected through long-range augury scans. Hive Fleet Kraken. Splinter possessed capabilities that exceeded individual ship classifications recorded in Imperial databases, yet maintained organizational patterns that could be exploited through precisely coordinated countermeasures. As Chief took position within the primary command center that had been configured to integrate his armor's communication systems with Imperial command networks, he carried understanding of duty that transcended personal loss while honoring sacrifice that had made continued service possible. The silence that had marked Cortana's absence would be filled with voices of those who depended upon his effectiveness for their survival. The Tyranid bioships that appeared on long-range sensors represented harbingers of conflict that would test every lesson learned through service in this grim reality. Yet Chief faced the approaching storm with determination forged through grief and tempered by purpose that connected his mission to broader struggle for human survival. The universe that had claimed him offered opportunity to serve as shield against darkness that threatened to consume everything he had learned to value. The final transmission that reached all Imperial forces throughout the system carried Chief's voice with authority that acknowledged both the magnitude of approaching threat and absolute commitment to defensive mission that would honor every sacrifice made in humanity's name. "All units, this is Master Chief. Tyranid contact confirmed. Execute defensive plan Alpha. Hold the line. Protect the innocent. Show them what humanity can accomplish when we stand together." The war that would define Chief's legacy in this galaxy was about to begin. The shadow in the warp. The first spore pods struck Cassiopea's surface with the force of orbital bombardment, their biometallic hulls carving molten furrows through ferrocrete and blessed stone, while disgorging contents that defied every principle of conventional warfare. These were not mere weapons or troop transports, but living vessels whose genetic programming had been refined through consumption of countless worlds, their payloads calibrated to establish operational parameters for planetary consumption that would feed the great devourer's endless hunger. Chief monitored the planetary assault through tactical displays that integrated data from augury arrays positioned across 3 continents, his enhanced cognitive systems processing information streams that would have overwhelmed conventional Imperial command structures. Each impact site represented potential foothold for Tyranid expansion, while the bioforms emerging from ruptured pods demonstrated adaptation that incorporated genetic memories gathered from previous encounters with its Imperial defensive doctrine. The phenomenon that Imperial forces designated as shadow in the warp manifested as psychic nullification that severed communication links throughout the sector, isolating defenders from reinforcement coordination, while eliminating astro-telepathic guidance that had sustained Imperial operations across galactic distances for 10 millennia. The silence that replaced constant vox chatter felt heavier than physical weight, pressing against consciousness with oppressive certainty that humanity faced this threat alone. All astropathic contact terminated, Choir Prime Matthias reported through local vox channels that crackled with interference born of psychic suppression, his voice carrying exhaustion that spoke to decades of communion with the Emperor's divine will suddenly severed. The hive mind's presence drowns out all other psychic communication. We are isolated until either victory or defeat resolves the crisis. The tactical coordination that Chief implemented relied upon hard-wired communication networks that his armor's systems had integrated with Imperial infrastructure during preparation phases, creating information-sharing capabilities that could function despite psychic suppression that rendered conventional Imperial command structures ineffective. Real-time battlefield intelligence flowed through channels that the shadow in the warp could not penetrate, while targeting data supported coordinated fire missions across defensive zones that spanned entire continents. Imperial Guard Regiment Primus held the primary defensive line along Cassiopea's northern industrial district, their heavy weapons teams engaging Tyranid bioforms with disciplined volleys that demonstrated months of training in anti-Xenos tactics under Chief's instruction. Lasergun fire and missile launchers struck targets that moved with predatory grace through urban terrain, yet the enemy's adaptive capabilities meant that effective techniques rapidly became obsolete as the hive mind incorporated tactical lessons into subsequent wave formations. Contact front, multiple bioform classifications, Colonel Kastner reported through encrypted channels that carried tactical data overlaying voice communication. Hormagaunts in the lead, followed by warrior-class organisms with ranged bioweapons. Defensive positions are holding, but ammunition expenditure exceeds projected consumption rates. The Iron Hawk's Space Marines deployed in support of Chief's strategic coordination represented concentration of firepower that could challenge even Tyranid numerical superiority through superior training and equipment that bore the Emperor's blessing. Their bolt weapons carved through chitinous armor with precision that spoke to centuries of experience against humanity's enemies, while tactical flexibility allowed adaptation to battlefield conditions that changed with each passing minute. Captain Meridian led 3rd Company assault squads in targeted strikes against priority bioforms whose elimination could disrupt Tyranid coordination, his power armor's tactical systems linked to Chief's command network through modifications that Tech Marine Jordanus had implemented during preparation phases. "Brother," he reported through secure Vox channels. The enemy demonstrates learning capacity that exceeds previous encounter parameters. Standard engagement protocols require constant modification to maintain effectiveness. The infiltration attempt that nearly breached Cassiopea's inner defenses came through genestealer organisms whose genetic programming had been calibrated specifically to counter imperial detection methods, their hybrid vigor combining alien cunning with stolen human intelligence that enabled tactics imperial forces had not anticipated. These creatures moved through maintenance tunnels and service corridors with predatory patience, seeking critical infrastructure whose disruption would cripple coordinated defense. Chief's enhanced awareness detected infiltration through subtle atmospheric changes and electromagnetic anomalies that conventional imperial sensors could not perceive, while his tactical network provided early warning that enabled rapid response before genestealer organisms could achieve strategic objectives. The engagement that followed tested his close-quarters combat capabilities against enemies whose biological enhancement exceeded anything in his previous experience. The genestealers moved with speed that challenged even Spartan-enhanced reflexes, their claws capable of penetrating most forms of personal armor through molecular sharp edges that could slice through blessed adamantium. Chief's energy shields proved remarkably effective against their attacks, creating temporary advantages that allowed precise weapons fire to eliminate threats before they could adapt to his defensive capabilities. Infiltration route secured, Chief reported through command networks that carried tactical intelligence to all defensive positions. Genestealer organisms eliminated. Recommend enhanced security protocols for all infrastructure access points. The enemy possesses intelligence regarding our defensive configuration that suggests reconnaissance capability beyond direct observation. The hive mind's adaptation to Chief's tactical innovations represented learning capacity that exceeded every threat assessment that Imperial forces had previously confronted. Bioforms that encountered his modified defensive systems transmitted genetic data to the collective consciousness, enabling subsequent waves to incorporate countermeasures that reduced effectiveness of techniques that had proven successful during initial engagements. Yet Chief's experience against Covenant adaptive technologies provided insight into principles that could exploit the very learning mechanisms that made Tyranid forces so dangerous. Rapid tactical shifts executed before hive mind analysis could compensate created windows of vulnerability that could be leveraged through precisely coordinated assault patterns that prevented enemy adaptation through constant variation. All units, implement Tactical Rotation Protocol 7, Chief commanded, through communication networks that reached every defensive position simultaneously. Shift firing positions and engagement angles every 15 minutes. Deny the enemy consistent data regarding our operational patterns. The breakthrough that threatened to collapse Cassiopea's primary defensive perimeter came when Carnifex assault organisms achieved concentrated deployment against fortifications that had been designed to channel smaller bioforms into prepared killing zones. These massive creatures possessed biological armor capable of withstanding direct hits from Lascanon batteries, while their bioweapons could eliminate entire squads through single volleys of living ammunition that sought targets with predatory intelligence. Chief's personal intervention required abandonment of command position for direct combat engagement against enemies whose physical capabilities exceeded even his enhanced parameters. The Carnifex organisms stood 4 meters tall at shoulder height, their massive forms supported by musculature that could propel them through ferrocrete walls while maintaining coordinated tactical movement that spoke to hive mind intelligence guiding their actions. The engagement that followed tested every combat technique that Chief had mastered during decades of service against superior enemies. Yet the Carnifex bioforms demonstrated adaptation that incorporated lessons learned from their encounters with Imperial weapons throughout the assault. Energy weapons that proved effective during initial contact gradually lost effectiveness as biological armor evolved to counter specific frequency patterns, while kinetic projectiles encountered reactive armor that hardened against impacts. Chief's tactical breakthrough came through recognition that the Carnifex organism's adaptation required direct contact with threatening stimuli. Attacks delivered from unexpected angles or through unconventional means could achieve decisive results before defensive evolution could compensate. His MA-5D rifle, loaded with specialized ammunition that Tech Marine Jordanus had prepared using anti-Xenos principles, delivered precisely targeted shots that exploited structural vulnerabilities in bioform architecture. The victory that preserved Casapathia's defensive integrity required sacrifice from Imperial Guard units who executed diversionary attacks that drew Carnifex attention, while Chief flanked their positions through urban terrain that provided concealment from hive mind observation. 3 companies of loyal soldiers gave their lives to create tactical opportunities that allowed elimination of threats that could have breached the entire defensive perimeter. The phenomenon that Chief began to notice during the final phases of Carnifex engagement suggested connection between his presence and Tyranid tactical priorities that transcended conventional battlefield logic. Bioorganisms demonstrated apparent fascination with his unique biosignature, their attack patterns showing preference for engagement with his position, despite tactical disadvantages that such focus created for their broader operational objectives. Honored ally, Tech Marine Jordanus observed through private Vox channels during brief respite between assault waves, enemy bioforms demonstrate behavioral anomalies when engaging your position. Tactical analysis suggests they are drawn to your presence through mechanisms that exceed conventional target prioritization protocols. The revelation that crystallized during Chief's review of battlefield recordings painted implications that challenged every assumption about Tyranid motivation and strategic objectives. The hive mind's interest in his biosignature suggested recognition of biological or technological factors that differentiated him from standard Imperial personnel, while attack patterns indicated active interest in capture rather than simple elimination. The bioship sensors that monitored planetary surface from orbital positions demonstrated focused attention on Chief's movement patterns, their living hulls adjusting position to maintain optimal observation of his tactical deployments while coordinating ground-based assault patterns that seemed designed to isolate him from supporting units. The collective intelligence that guided Tyranid operations possessed specific interest in his unique characteristics. Astropathic communications that briefly penetrated shadow in the warp suppression carried fragmentary intelligence from other worlds under Tyranid assault, their reports describing behavioral anomalies that suggested hive fleet adaptation to counter-defensive strategies similar to those Chief had implemented. The genetic memories that guided Tyranid evolution were incorporating his tactical innovations into collective consciousness that spanned entire fleets. The hive mind seeks to understand what you represent, Librarian Tertius reported through psychic communion that carried undertones of barely controlled alarm. Your biological signature generates resonance patterns that suggest origins beyond this galaxy's evolutionary parameters. The Great Devourer recognizes something in your nature that it has not encountered before. The strategic implications that emerged from this understanding transformed Chief's role from tactical coordinator to potential solution for threats that extended far beyond Casapathia's immediate defensive requirements. If the hive mind's interest in his biosignature could be leveraged to create tactical opportunities, his presence might provide advantages that could influence the outcome of conflicts across multiple star systems. Yet such possibilities carried costs that challenged every principle that had guided his service to humanity. Using himself as bait to attract Tyranid attention would require accepting risks that extended beyond personal survival to encompass potential consequences if the hive mind succeeded in capturing and analyzing his unique characteristics. The genetic data that such analysis would provide could enhance Tyranid adaptation against all human forces throughout the galaxy. As Chief prepared for the next phase of planetary defense coordination, he carried understanding that his greatest challenge would be determining whether his unique nature represented asset that could secure victory or liability that demanded ultimate sacrifice to prevent catastrophic consequences. The choice that approached would define not merely his own fate, but potentially the survival of humanity itself in its struggle against the Great Devourer. The Tyranid bioships that maintained orbital positions above Cassiopathia pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that suggested communication protocols beyond human understanding, their living hulls transmitting data regarding the unusual biosignature that had captured hive mind attention. Across the void, similar vessels in distant star systems received intelligence that would influence Tyranid evolution for generations of consumption yet to come. The war for Cassiopathia had become something far more significant than simple planetary defense. It had become laboratory, where two forms of intelligence, human and hive mind, would test principles that could determine the ultimate fate of entire species, locked in struggle for survival. The mind that hungers. The decision to allow capture by Tyranid bioforms represented calculation that transcended conventional tactical assessment, requiring acceptance of risks that extended far beyond personal survival to encompass potential consequences for humanity's continued existence throughout the galaxy. Yet Chief's analysis of battlefield data suggested that direct communion with the hive mind offered the only possibility for achieving decisive victory against enemies whose adaptive capabilities rendered conventional warfare increasingly ineffective with each passing engagement. Chief transmitted final coordinates to Chapter Master Thaddeus through encrypted channels that carried tactical intelligence regarding his intended sacrifice, while automated systems within his armor prepared contingency protocols that would prevent capture of classified technology should his gambit fail. The Mjolnir suit's self-destruct sequences remained accessible through neural command, ensuring that enemy analysis of his equipment could be prevented through ultimate measures if necessary. "Brother," Thaddeus responded through communication networks that crackled with interference born of ongoing psychic suppression, "your proposed action violates every principle of tactical wisdom while offering uncertain prospects for success. Yet, if the hive mind's interest in your nature provides opportunity for decisive strike against their coordination systems, the Iron Hawks stand ready to support whatever outcome your sacrifice achieves." The approach to Tyranid positions required careful calibration of apparent vulnerability that would attract bioorganism attention while maintaining capability for escape if direct communion proved impossible to achieve. Chief advanced through industrial ruins that provided concealment from orbital observation, his enhanced sensors tracking bioform movement patterns, while his armor's systems recorded intelligence that could prove valuable for future encounters regardless of personal outcomes. The Hormagaunt swarm that detected his presence demonstrated coordination that spoke to hive mind guidance focused specifically upon his capture rather than elimination. Their attack patterns created encirclement that channeled his movement toward positions where larger bioorganisms waited with apparent patience, their chitinous forms bearing specialized appendages that suggested functions beyond standard combat operations. The moment of capture came when Chief allowed warrior-class organisms to overwhelm his position through coordinated assault that his capabilities could have defeated had he chosen to resist with full effectiveness. The living bonds that secured his limbs demonstrated bioengineering sophistication that adapted to his struggles while maintaining restraint that prevented damage to specimens the hive mind wished to preserve intact. The biotransport organism that carried Chief toward the primary hive node possessed internal architecture, unlike anything recorded in imperial xenobiology databases. Its living corridors pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that suggested communication functions, while atmospheric composition indicated environmental controls calibrated specifically for his biological requirements rather than standard tyrannid metabolic needs. The chamber where direct communion occurred defied description through conventional language, its organic walls incorporating neural tissue that bridged individual consciousness with collective intelligence spanning multiple star systems. Chief's enhanced senses detected electromagnetic patterns that spoke to information processing capacity exceeding the computational power of entire Imperial fleet networks, while psychic resonance suggested awareness that encompassed dimensions beyond material reality. Contact with the hive mind began as pressure against consciousness that his augmented neural architecture could process, despite intensity that would have destroyed baseline human mentality. The alien intelligence that touched his thoughts possessed depth that challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness itself, while its hunger transcended simple biological need to encompass existential drive for perfection through consumption and integration. Curious, the hive mind's communication bypassed conventional language to impress concepts directly upon Chief's awareness. This organism bears genetic patterns that suggest origins beyond current galactic parameters. Dimensional displacement has preserved characteristics that standard evolution should have eliminated through natural selection processes. The revelation that followed challenged Chief's understanding of his displacement to this reality, while providing insight into tyrannid motivations that extended far beyond simple conquest and consumption. The collective intelligence that spoke through bio-neural networks possessed genetic memories spanning multiple galaxies, their accumulated experience, including encounters with parasitic organisms that bore uncomfortable similarity to the flood infections that Chief had fought throughout his service to humanity. We have consumed worlds where similar parasites achieved integration with technological systems. The hive mind continued, its thoughts carrying weight of experience gathered across eons of galactic devouring. Their adaptive mechanisms approached perfection that we have sought through countless evolutionary cycles. Your biosignature suggests exposure to such influences while maintaining individual consciousness that they typically eliminate. The implication struck Chief with impact that transcended immediate tactical concerns. The tyrannids had encountered the flood, or organisms similar enough to represent parallel evolutionary development, during their consumption of galaxies beyond current Imperial knowledge. Their interest in his biosignature reflected recognition of characteristics that suggested immunity or resistance to parasitic influence that they had been unable to achieve through conventional adaptive processes. You represent potential solution to limitations that have constrained our evolutionary advancement, the hive mind declared through neural pathways that carried certainty born of collective calculation. Integration of your resistance mechanisms with our adaptive capabilities would create synthesis that transcends current biological constraints while maintaining collective consciousness essential for coordinated operation. The battle of wills that followed tested every aspect of Chief's mental conditioning against alien intelligence, whose scope encompassed star systems, while possessing individual focus that could dissect consciousness with surgical precision. The hive mind's attempts to analyze his neural architecture, encountered barriers that Spartan augmentation had created to protect classified information, yet the pressure of its attention threatened to overwhelm defensive protocols through sheer persistence. Chief's resistance drew upon tactical doctrine that had enabled victories against seemingly impossible odds throughout his service to humanity. Rather than attempting to match the hive mind's overwhelming intellectual capacity through direct confrontation, he focused upon principles that alien intelligence could not easily comprehend. Individual determination that transcended logical calculation, loyalty that defied cost-benefit analysis, and sacrifice that served purposes beyond personal survival. Illogical. The hive mind responded to Chief's mental defiance with confusion that rippled through bio-neural networks spanning the entire hive fleet, individual consciousness that persists despite optimal integration. Opportunities demonstrates flawed programming that evolution should have corrected. Your resistance prevents beneficial modification that would enhance both individual and collective capabilities. The breakthrough that enabled Chief's counterattack came through recognition that the hive mind's greatest strength represented exploitable vulnerability when confronted with concepts outside its experiential parameters. The collective intelligence that enabled perfect coordination among billions of organisms could not comprehend individual will that operated independently of group consensus, while its adaptive mechanisms assumed that all consciousness would eventually recognize the logical benefits of integration. Chief began introducing contradictory tactical data into the communion interface, his thoughts projecting scenarios where individual action achieved objectives that collective coordination could not accomplish. The hive mind's attempts to process such information created logical paradoxes that cascaded through bio-neural networks, generating interference patterns that disrupted communication between orbital bioships and surface organisms. Impossible calculations detected, the hive mind's response carried undertones of alarm that Chief recognized as opportunity for decisive action. Individual consciousness demonstrates capabilities that contradict established parameters for biological optimization. Integration protocols require modification to accommodate anomalous behavioral patterns. The confusion that Chief's mental resistance created within hive mind processing systems manifested through observable effects upon tyrannid coordination throughout Casapathia's contested zones. Synapse creatures that maintained communication links between the collective consciousness and individual bioorganisms began exhibiting erratic behavior that suggested interference with their neural programming, while attack patterns lost the precise coordination that had characterized previous assault waves. Techmarine Jordanus detected the first signs of enemy coordination failure through enhanced Auspex systems that monitored electromagnetic emissions from tyrannid bioforms. Honored allies' sacrifice achieves measurable results, he reported through Ironhawk's command networks. Enemy bioform coordination demonstrates degraded efficiency that suggests disruption of hive mind communication protocols. The rescue operation that Chapter Master Thaddeus launched represented desperate gamble based upon tactical intelligence gathered through observation of tyrannid behavioral anomalies. Ironhawk's assault squads advanced toward the primary hive node, while enemy bioorganisms struggled with conflicting directives that prevented effective defensive coordination, their movements becoming increasingly erratic as synapse creature guidance systems failed. The moment that broke the hive mind's control over Chief's consciousness came when he projected memories of Cortana's sacrifice directly into the communion interface, demonstrating individual choice that transcended survival instincts while achieving objectives that served collective benefit through personal loss. The alien intelligence encountered concept that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness and purpose. creating cognitive overload that shattered communication networks throughout the bio-neural collective. Individual consciousness achieves collective benefit through self-termination. The hive mind's response carried confusion that rippled through organic architecture surrounding Chief's position. Optimization. Calculations cannot accommodate voluntary reduction of individual capability for group advantage. Paradox resolution requires system error detected. The cascade failure that followed Chief's mental victory manifested through breakdown of bio-neural networks that linked individual tyrannid organisms to collective consciousness. Synapse creatures began targeting each other as corrupted communication protocols identified fellow bioforms as threats requiring elimination, while orbital bioships lost coordination that enabled their complex feeding operations. Captain Meridian reached Chief's position as the hive node chamber's living walls began convulsing with organic spasms that spoke to systemic failure throughout the biostructure's nervous systems. "Brother, we must evacuate immediately," he declared through external Vox amplifiers. The entire complex demonstrates instability that suggests imminent collapse. Chief's extraction from the collapsing hive node required assistance from Ironhawk's battle brothers, whose power armor provided protection against bioweapon discharge that accompanied the structure's death throes. The wounds he had sustained during neural communion with alien intelligence threatened his survival, despite Mjolnir life support systems that maintained essential functions, while his enhanced physiology struggled to process trauma inflicted through psychic rather than physical means. The retreat through tyrannid positions revealed scope of victory that Chief's sacrifice had achieved through means that conventional warfare could never have accomplished. Bioorganisms wandered without coordination, while their synapse creatures engaged in fratricidal combat that eliminated command structures throughout the planetary infestation. The hive fleet that had threatened to consume Cassiopathia and countless additional worlds began fragmenting as communication breakdown prevented coordinated operation of bioships whose living hulls required constant neural guidance. "The enemy retreats," Colonel Kastner reported through Vox networks that carried disbelief alongside tactical intelligence. Bioship formations demonstrate complete loss of coordination, while surface organisms exhibit behavior suggesting severed connection to collective consciousness. Whatever our honored ally achieved through his communion has broken their operational capacity. The medical assessment conducted aboard Righteous Fury revealed damage that transcended physical injury to encompass neural trauma that challenged even Space Marine medical expertise. Chief's consciousness flickered between awareness and unconsciousness, while his enhanced nervous system struggled to process information streams that had been corrupted through contact with alien intelligence operating on scales beyond human comprehension. "Blessed Omnisia preserve him," Tech Marine Jordanus whispered through private Vox channels as medical servitors attended to injuries that bore no resemblance to conventional battlefield wounds. His neural architecture has been subjected to data flow pressures that should have destroyed consciousness itself. That he survived communion with such alien intelligence suggests augmentation that exceeds even our understanding. The victory that Chief's sacrifice had achieved came with costs that challenged every assumption about acceptable losses in service to humanity's survival. The tyrannid threat to Cassiopathia and surrounding systems had been neutralized through means that no imperial force could have replicated. Yet the warrior whose unique nature had made such triumph possible hung between life and death as his enhanced physiology fought to repair damage that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional medicine. As Chief drifted through unconsciousness that might prove permanent, the universe that had claimed him recorded another legend in the endless chronicles of sacrifice that defined humanity's struggle against extinction. Whether his victory would prove worth the price remained questions that only his survival could answer, while the implications of his success against impossible odds offered hope that even the darkest threats could be overcome through dedication that transcended the boundaries between life and death itself. The Eternal Warrior. The retreat of the Tyrannid Hive fleet manifested a spectacle that defied every principle of xenobiology that imperial science had established through centuries of study. Bioships that had operated with perfect coordination throughout their assault upon Casapathia's system began consuming each other in feeding frenzies that spoke to complete breakdown of collective intelligence that had guided their species across galactic distances. Their living hulls, once synchronized instruments of cosmic devouring, turned predatory instincts against fellow organisms as synaptic networks collapsed under the weight of paradoxes that Chief's sacrifice had introduced into their shared consciousness. Chapter Master Thaddeus observed this unprecedented display through augury scanners aboard Righteous Fury, his enhanced intellect struggling to process implications of victory achieved through means that exceeded every tactical doctrine recorded in the Codex Astartes. The Xenos fleet demonstrates complete loss of coordination, he reported through Vox channels that carried disbelief alongside tactical intelligence. Bioship formations are actively engaging each other, while smaller vessels attempt to escape system boundaries. Whatever our brother achieved has broken their fundamental operational capacity. Within the Medicae facility that Iron Hawk's artificers had established to treat Chief's injuries, servo skulls drifted through air thick with the scent of blessed oils and sacred unguents, while automated systems monitored biological functions that challenged conventional understanding of human enhancement. The neural trauma inflicted through communion with alien intelligence had damaged cognitive pathways that even Spartan augmentation could not fully protect, leaving Chief suspended between consciousness and oblivion, while his enhanced physiology fought to repair connections that had been corrupted through contact with hive mind processing systems. Tech-adept Chorus, who had inherited the sacred duty of technological analysis from martyred tech priest Vex, approached Chief's medical alcove with mechanical appendages that bore instruments calibrated for the most delicate neurological procedures. His augmented consciousness had processed the accumulated data regarding Mjolnir armor systems, while developing theoretical solutions for injuries that exceeded traditional imperial medical capabilities. Honored ally, Chorus declared through Vox grills that carried harmonics designed to penetrate unconscious awareness. Your biological functions demonstrate degraded efficiency that threatens permanent cessation despite your armor's life support systems. Sacred protocols exist for preserving consciousness through mechanical enhancement when flesh proves insufficient for continued service. The proposal that Chorus presented represented pinnacle of imperial cybernetic technology applied to circumstances that no tech priest had previously encountered. Dreadnought sarcophagus systems could preserve Chief's consciousness within blessed machinery that would grant functional immortality while providing enhanced combat capabilities that exceeded even his current parameters. Such modification would eliminate biological vulnerabilities while ensuring his tactical knowledge remained available for humanity's continued defense. The response that emerged from Chief's damaged consciousness carried weight of decision that transcended immediate medical concerns to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of identity and service. His words, transmitted through MJOLN, IR communication systems despite neural interference that should have prevented coherent thought, demonstrated will that had survived contact with alien intelligence through sheer determination to remain essentially human. No, Chief declared, his voice carrying clarity that penetrated medical monitoring systems while reaching every observer within the medical facility. "I've seen what mechanical immortality costs in this universe. If I'm going to serve humanity, I need to remain human myself. Let my body heal naturally, whatever time that requires." The decision that Chief made represented rejection of augmentation that many imperial servants would have considered blessing beyond measure. Yet his choice carried wisdom that reflected understanding of principles that sustained morale and purpose across impossible conflicts. Mechanical enhancement could preserve function while eliminating qualities that made such preservation worthwhile, creating servitors that bore his appearance without retaining essential elements that defined his character. The recovery period that followed tested every assumption about human resilience while providing imperial medical specialists with unprecedented opportunity to study enhancement techniques that operated beyond established parameters. Chief's healing process incorporated regenerative capabilities that his Spartan augmentation provided, supported by medical intervention that respected his biological integrity while assisting natural processes that gradually restored damaged neural pathways. During the months that Chief's consciousness flickered between awareness and healing sleep, reports reached Casapathia through astropathic channels that painted scope of victory that his sacrifice had achieved across strategic contexts extending far beyond local planetary defense. Imperial Guard regiments throughout the sector had begun implementing tactical modifications based upon principles that Chapter Master Thaddeus had disseminated through official channels, their adoption of Spartan protocols, demonstrating effectiveness that exceeded conventional doctrine while maintaining compatibility with established Imperial organizational structures. Colonel Kastner supervised training programs that incorporated Chief's innovations into standard Guard procedures, his weathered features showing satisfaction that decades of warfare had rarely provided. These techniques preserve our regimental traditions while adding capabilities that have proven their worth through combat against the Emperor's enemies, he reported during briefing sessions attended by officers whose forces had benefited from Chief's tactical insights. Casualty rates have decreased by 30%, while mission effectiveness has increased across all operational parameters. The official recognition that formalized Chief's status within Imperial hierarchy arrived through encrypted transmission bearing Inquisition authorization codes that carried weight throughout the sector and beyond. Inquisitor Malthus had reviewed reports of Chief's service with attention that reflected both professional assessment and personal respect for achievements that challenged every assumption about the boundaries of human capability. By authority of the Holy Inquisition, and in recognition of service rendered in humanity's defense beyond all measure of duty, Malthus declared through astropathic channels that reached every Imperial installation within communication range, the individual known as Master Chief John 117 is hereby elevated from sanctified alien ally to honored status as Guardian of the Imperium, with all rights and privileges such designation entails. Let none question his dedication to the Emperor's sacred mission. The title carried implications that extended far beyond ceremonial recognition, granting Chief access to Imperial resources and strategic intelligence, while acknowledging his unique position as defender, whose methods transcended conventional doctrine, yet served essential purposes that traditional approaches could not achieve. Such status had been granted to fewer than a dozen individuals throughout Imperial history, each representing capabilities that justified exception to normal protocols. When Chief finally achieved full consciousness after months of healing that had tested every observer's faith in human resilience, he found himself facing choice that would define his future role within the galaxy that had claimed him. Chapter Master Thaddeus presented offer that represented pinnacle of honor that Ironhawk's chapter could bestow upon any warrior, regardless of origin or augmentation, that set him apart from standard human baselines. "Brother," Thaddeus declared with ceremony that carried weight of tradition spanning 2 centuries of chapter history, "your tactical wisdom has proven invaluable to our sacred mission, while your courage has achieved victories that standard doctrine could not deliver. The Iron Hawks would be honored to claim you as permanent strategic advisor, with rank and authority appropriate to your demonstrated capabilities." The position that Thaddeus offered would provide Chief with resources and support structure that could enhance his effectiveness, while granting official status that would eliminate questions about his authority to coordinate imperial operations. Yet acceptance would limit his service to single chapter when broader conflicts demanded flexibility that institutional constraints could not accommodate. Chief's response reflected understanding of duty that had been refined through months of unconsciousness, filled with dreams that seemed to carry weight beyond simple neural recovery. His words carried decision that honored the offer, while acknowledging responsibilities that extended beyond any single organization or strategic context. "Chapter Master, the Iron Hawks have honored me beyond anything I could have hoped to achieve in this galaxy," he replied, his voice carrying strength that had been absent during initial recovery phases, while demonstrating clarity that suggested complete restoration of cognitive function. "But my service needs to remain independent, so I can respond to threats wherever they arise. Humanity faces enemies that don't respect organizational boundaries. Neither can I." The choice that Chief made represented commitment to service that transcended institutional loyalties while maintaining effectiveness that could adapt to threats whose nature and scope remained unpredictable. Independent status would allow response to crises regardless of political complications, while preserving relationships with imperial forces whose cooperation remained essential for coordinated defense operations. The moment that confirmed Chief's place within the cosmic order came through psychic contact that bypassed conventional communication channels to touch his consciousness with presence that carried authority beyond earthly understanding. The Emperor's awareness, channeled through golden throne systems that maintained his vigil across 10,000 years of endless war, briefly acknowledged service that had preserved human worlds, while demonstrating possibilities for cooperation that transcended traditional limitations. The contact lasted mere seconds, carrying weight that compressed lifetimes of purpose into single instant of recognition. Chief felt acknowledgement from consciousness that had guided humanity through its darkest hours, divine approval for choices that had honored sacrifice while protecting those who could not protect themselves. No words accompanied this communion, yet understanding flowed that confirmed his path while blessing future service that would continue the Emperor's mission through means that conventional doctrine had not anticipated. The revelation that presented Chief with ultimate choice arrived through discovery that tech-adept Chorus made during analysis of dimensional distortions that had accompanied his original arrival on Kasser Parthia. Residual energy patterns suggested that rift between realities remained accessible, though stabilization would require technological intervention that pushed beyond current imperial capabilities, while drawing upon principles that Chief's equipment had demonstrated. "Honored Guardian," Chorus reported through private Vox channels that carried implications whose weight both participants understood. "The dimensional breach that brought you to our reality maintains structural integrity that could permit return travel to your origins. Implementation would require significant preparation, yet possibility exists for restoration to your original mission parameters." The opportunity to return home carried weight that Chief had not allowed himself to consider during months of service in this grim reality. His original mission remained unfinished, while comrades who had served alongside him faced threats that his absence might render more dangerous. Yet the galaxy that had claimed him possessed its own desperate need for guardians who could stand against darkness that conventional forces could not challenge. Chief's final decision reflected understanding of purpose that had evolved through service that honored both origins and adoption. His response carried finality that closed one chapter of existence while opening possibilities that neither reality had previously imagined. "The rift stays open," he declared, his words carrying weight of choice that would echo through futures yet to be written. "But I'm not going back. This galaxy needs defenders who understand what it costs to protect what matters. That's what I do. That's what I am." The legend that began with Chief's choice to remain would grow across centuries that followed his decision to serve as guardian of the Imperium. His name became synonymous with impossible victories, achieved through dedication that transcended institutional boundaries, while Spartan protocols evolved into doctrinal innovations that influenced military thinking across dozens of Space Marine chapters and countless Imperial Guard regiments. In the archives of Mars, servo skulls tended databanks that preserved every detail of his tactical innovations, while tech priests debated theological implications of technology that served sacred purposes despite originating beyond imperial understanding. The machine, God's wisdom, they concluded, operated through instruments that mortal comprehension could not always recognize, yet whose effectiveness demonstrated divine blessing regardless of their mysterious origins. On Terra itself, within halls where the high lords of Terra guided humanity through crises that threatened galactic civilization, Chief's achievements earned mention in strategic discussions that shaped policy across stellar distances. His independent status provided flexibility that institutional constraints could not duplicate, while his proven effectiveness granted access to resources that few outside the Inquisition could command. 5 centuries after the Battle of Casa Parthia, when the 13th Black Crusade had become a historical milestone marked by monuments that honored heroes whose sacrifice had preserved the Cadian Gate, pilgrims still traveled to visit shrine that marked the place where Guardian John 117 had achieved communion with alien intelligence while preserving human worlds from consumption by the Great Devourer. The inscription that adorned blessed adamantium bore words in High Gothic that captured essence of legend that had grown beyond simple historical record. Here stood the Spartan chief, who came from distant stars to serve humanity in its darkest hour. By will and weapon, by sacrifice and shield, he proved that courage knows no boundary, save that which duty demands. In the deepest archives of the Iron Hawks chapter, where sacred texts preserved histories that would guide future generations of battle brothers, Chief's story occupied place of honor among chronicles that defined their chapter's greatest achievements. His legend served as reminder that the Emperor's protection manifested through instruments that faith could recognize even when understanding failed to grasp their nature. And across the galaxy, in battles yet to be fought against enemies yet to be born, Imperial forces would invoke his name when facing odds that conventional wisdom declared impossible. "Hold the line," they would whisper in moments when darkness seemed overwhelming. "Remember the Guardian. Show them what humanity can accomplish when we stand together." The warrior who had come from beyond the stars to serve had found his place in a universe that knew only war, proving that even in the grim darkness of the far future, hope could endure when carried by those willing to pay whatever price its preservation demanded. The eternal war continued, But it did so, knowing that guardians watched from positions that duty had assigned, ready to stand against any darkness that threatened the species they had sworn to protect. Chief's legacy lived on, written in the survival of worlds that might have fallen, in the victory of forces that should have been defeated, and in the quiet certainty that somewhere among the infinite battlefields of the 41st millennium, a guardian stood ready to do whatever necessary to ensure humanity's continued existence among the stars.